This is Rama Shinobi and today I am going to narrate second and final part of What If Kid Naruto merged with Aizen. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
A mission? While his younger brother loudly expressed his surprise, Uchiha Itachi remained silent. With a withering glance, he silenced him and went on. Under the Hokage Sama's directive, we are to escort a particular person to the land of the waves. The sound of that made Sasuke and Hinata's ears perk up. It was a very exciting prospect to leave the village's gloomy, perplexing atmosphere. Over the past week or so, they had been clamoring for a chance like this, and that opportunity had come up. Itachi continued, penetrating the two genins with his eyes. Due to the rather special conditions regarding the strength of this team, we have been given a C-rank mission right out the bat. I suggest you spend less time fawning over the details, and go back and prepare for the ordeal. His brother's reprimand, chill the fuck out, Ni-san, was not going to depress him. That expletive had caused Itachi's eyes to widen, but he remained silent. Considering how he has treated me over the past few months, I don't believe he has the right to say anything at all. Despite his poise, Itachi did a magnificent triple take. Now, Sasuke-kun, he said. Hinata hadn't stumbled over a single word of that final sentence. I don't think you should be talking to your older brother that way. Apologize immediately. In fact, Sasuke appeared embarrassed. This was insane. How is she doing this, for crying out loud? Shock whirled through Itachi's mind. The younger Uchiha prodigy reluctantly said, I'm sorry, Ni-san. Tight-lipped, Itachi nodded. Sasuke's sudden maturity was not something to be surprised by at this point. Oh ho. The former Anbu Jonin moaned to himself, oh, seven hells. The worst times were usually when Naruto stepped in. His sing-song voice made Sasuke feel as angry as a kitten. Ryusenka. I spy, with my very eye, a little, meek Sasuke. Chan, who is going to cry, he said. For a new reason, his face was red. Oh, you bloody faggot, he said. I'm going to tear you a new one large enough to fit. Hinata's shrill cry, stop it, echoed in the main courtyard outside the headquarters. Naruto-kun, now you apologize to Sasuke-kun immediately, or else. Suddenly, Itachi became intrigued. Or what, once more, there it was. The perilous gleam had returned. It appeared as though Naruto was perched on a precipice, one from which he could easily tumble in an instant. With menace emanating from every pore on his body, he stepped forward. It was a heavy, strange, almost crushing silence. Or else what, Hinata? Chan. The voice appeared suddenly, as if it had been carried by a gust of wind from afar and had just happened to land on the blonde Jinchuriki's ears. Hinata continued to gaze, a little reluctantly. Apparently, she had not heard that voice. He began. He calmed himself with an almost visible effort of will. He bowed and closed his eyes. He said, I apologize for my earlier comment, Sasuke, without showing any emotion. His anger appeared to have subsided, and his face was calm once more. His irises gleamed with a renewed resolve as he opened his eyelids. Let us start the mission, shall we? Our assignment has arrived, it would seem. All three turned. An elderly geezer with a hunched back and wrinkles faced them. Wearing a huge backpack demonstrated that he still had physical strength and that his abilities had not failed. He wore a pointed hat that looked like an oddly shaped onion to Itachi. The last vestige of his young face, his gray French dot-cut beard, gave him the appearance of grace. He removed a towel from his shoulders and used it to try in vain to wipe his face. He still had the appearance of someone who had run a mile and a half in a minute. He said, greetings, first. The Uchiha Jonin was slightly irritated by the sharp edge in his voice. Although he appeared somewhat drunk and uneasy, this was not due to his intoxication. Maybe he had witnessed Naruto and Sasuke's earlier encounter, and maybe he was hiding something that would eventually be revealed. Itachi stepped forward to give him a handshake. He seemed preoccupied and had a very firm grip. My name is Tazuna. I believe you are the team who shall be escorting me, he asked. He somewhat resembles Hokage Sama. He turned to introduce the genins and looked back. Uchiha Itachi. I shall be your chief contact, and these three here will assist me in assuring your safety, he said. To shake the old man's hand, they all moved forward. I believe your assignment is to escort me until my village, in the land of the waves, and then protect my life with your own until I finish constructing the bridge, yes? Shall we get going? Then? The Jonin nodded and gestured toward the gate. They formed a protective circle around Tazuna as they left the village, prepared to prevent any accidents. This mission didn't sit well with Itachi. Somehow, he thought that everything was going to blow up in Sasuke and Naruto's face because the old man wasn't being as forthcoming as he ought to have been. all it required was a spark. The very corners of his mouth twisted into a smile that only those who were looking for it could see. I would be more than happy to supply that spark. Naruto, you finally reveal yourself. Hiruzen, the Sarutobi, stared into his crystal ball. Inside the glass exterior, the distorted images of the five leaving the village were clearly visible. He had witnessed the whole conversation between them, and he had seen how Naruto, for the first time in years, showed that he was capable of feeling emotions by shedding the layers of politeness and blandness he had covered himself with. However, even though he was happy that he had done so at last, the Sandaime wished it had never happened. In a perverse way, Naruto's continued shielding had given him hope that there was something positive beneath those layers. That people would learn to accept him as the hero he truly was once he truly demonstrated who he was. However, he had been equally terrified of the other outcome. That Naruto had devolved into a soulless cavern, a limitless holding tank for all the hate directed towards him. Sarutobi had been afraid that the person behind all that civility had been corrupted and was now just a puppet used by the villagers. In his crystal ball, he saw something entirely different. Hiruzen had not thought of this option among all the others. The reality was that Naruto was just Naruto. When Hinata provoked him, he briefly saw a willful child who was similar to Naruto in that he was simple-minded, immature, and young. He was exactly the kind of legacy Namikaze Minato would have wished to leave to the village he loved. The child Hiruzen had been waiting impatiently to see. The Hokage was not persuaded, for some reason. Everything appeared too ideal, as if the previous 3 years of transformation and disengagement should be disregarded. The 13-year-old blonde seemed to be deliberately displaying this side to him. Hiruzen's belief that the Jinchuriki had not changed might have been the glue holding the whole thing together. What the devil am I thinking? The Sandaime scolded himself for being a foolish overthinker. Not that Naruto wasn't behaving strangely, but to think that even his typical persona was a charade. This had gotten out of hand. The old man had lost himself in his worry for the Uzumaki. He reclined in his chair and gently massaged his temples. He thought back to the day it all began, when his student had once asked him for a favor. The greatest favor of all. Hiruzen was unsure of how long he could keep Minato out of trouble, but he still stood by the promise he had given the teenager. A knock on the door was heard. He said, "Come in," appreciating the diversion. He should take a break from his obsession with the blonde Jinchuriki for a bit. The messenger came in, clearly anxious. Hiruzen's gaze shifted to the wall clock. At this point, he had been anticipating the news of the Nara Shikaku death investigation. "Sandaime Sama," he said, "as you requested, we kept a very proper vigil over the Nara property and the house grounds for the last 48 hours. We had a break-in, unfortunately. Perhaps the people who entered were the murderers, who had forgotten important evidence that his team might have overlooked. What happened? Did you get any information on the intruders?" In saying, "We do not have any faces, Sandaime Sama," the man managed to appear contrite. He would be better. We could have paid a heavy price for these worthless individuals. But we did notice one thing, as they were leaving. This was the key. As if the news would change everything, even the messenger paused. "We saw the intruder's eyes. It broke the Sandaime's heart. That's not it, that's not that, not that." The man concluded, one of them had a Sharingan, confirming the old man's worst suspicions. "Oh, this isn't possible at this moment." The messenger bowed deeply and said, "Very well. Anything else? You may leave." Hiruzen threw his head into his palms as soon as the man left the room. This was the last straw. With nearly verified rumors of a coup d'état imminent, tensions against the clan that wielded the Dojutsu were already at an absurdly high level. They were distrusted, and there were occasionally open conflicts between them and the other villagers. Their adoption of Uzumaki Naruto had only increased the other people's anxiety that something bad was about to happen. And now that they were unmistakably linked to the killing of a crucial figure in the village's safety, the evidencia, albeit very circumstantial, would escalate the situation and lead to only one possible conclusion. There was only one way to prevent the inevitable civil war. This implies that I will need to. I'll have to give that man an opportunity to validate the rumors. Your means have been met, Danzo." As he was thinking it, his old friend showed up. He stood quietly on the windowsill, his clothes motionless in the wind. He appeared menacing, like the very embodiment of death. Well, Hiruzen," he said, his grunting voice fitting the wrinkly face of an elderly man. "I believe it is time." Not even his head was raised by the Sandaime. As the village's leader, he had once again failed to provide for everyone. And now he had been compelled to allow the destiny of a whole clan to depend on the person who cared about them the least. "I hope this never-ending cycle of bad choices ends. Duty is as heavy as a mountain. Death is lighter than a feather. I wish I were no longer alive. The irascible geezer had arrived in the country of the waves with his shinobi escort. The unfinished bridge loomed over them like a gigantic sea creature, imposing by design and still towering in size. It represented the village's unfinished fight against the suffering and injustice they were experiencing. Tazuna.san had informed them of the mission's parameters during their journey. Gadu. Something. A businessman with a hostile bent and a penchant for foolish behavior. The bridge being constructed to save the people, blah blah blah. The genins don't give a damn. In an attempt to block out the annoying noise by ignoring it, Sasuke was idly scratching his nose. Even Hinata was unable to control her yawning, but at least she was trying to look interested. It was difficult to care about a place they would never, ever go to again, much less the economic standing of a small, unimportant nation. But they were being compensated for their mission. They had to stick it out, whether they wanted to or not. Naruto prodded Hinata with his elbow, waking her from her trance. She nodded subtly, trying not to laugh. "Nay, Hinata. Chan," he whispered. "Don't you think he simply cannot stop babbling about his country?" What was funny wasn't what was said, but rather the sardonic callousness with which the blonde delivered it. "Whatever, man," added the Uchiha. Hinata nodded in agreement, hesitating at the phrase, "It's not like we're listening to that shit anyway." Naruto said, "I'm sorry," as if speaking to no one. "With the constant torture, why are you so desperately trying to fit in?" Sasuke.kun. As far as Sasuke was concerned, Naruto seemed to be unwinnable. Sasuke, his face blood-red, opened his mouth to try to strike back, then shut it again, too furious to speak. He snorted and turned his head away, his pouty lips showing even from that distance. Ignoring the juvenile arguments that broke out behind his back, Uchiha Itachi walked ahead. He saw himself as escorting the elderly man by himself. But Sasuke needed someone to make him feel better. "Ni-san," he said in a nasal, whiny voice that brought back memories for Itachi. He dismissed Tazuna's objections, saying, "Oh chill them tits, geezer. No one's talking to you. When will we get to this little shitty village anyway?" Hinata had also attempted to speak, but he had cut her off with a stern look that said, "Not now, woman," more effectively than any words could. Itachi answered, "Now keep quiet, Sasuke. We'll get there when we get there." He had no time for such childish arguments. He was worried about his own things. The only reliable, double agent and the only liaison between the Hokage and his clan during his entire tenure in the Anbu was the Uchiha genius. All the others had been discovered and brutally executed. He believed that the Sandaime still relied on him for information, even after he had left the dreary and uninteresting job of an assassin. A month could easily pass before he returned to the midst of things, keeping his restless clan at bay, because he was sent on a mission that would take at least a few weeks. In addition, he was still a little uneasy about what Shisui had said about Naruto. The now dead man had warned, "Be wary of his true intentions, for he shall end up betraying you and the entire village, and probably kill you to boot." Itachi had no idea how exactly Shisui had discovered this information, but it didn't matter anymore. The one person who knew more than he should have and made unnecessary deductions was silenced forever. In his mind, he had also discussed and questioned the matter with Nara Shikaku. It appeared to be an overly abrupt move, a hasty leap to attack. Such an extreme move would be regarded as extremely aggressive in shogi and typically denotes a last-ditch effort to win when the cards were stacked against you. Since the majority of the players hadn't even made their identities known, there had been no need for such a move at this early stage. Naruto.kun, what are your real motivations? He frequently pondered, attempting to make a single guess. Good or evil? There was still disagreement over whether the blonde Jinchuriki was the village's savior and whether his actions would actually help them escape their depressed state. He still had a lot going for him right now, and Itachi was content to wait and let things happen naturally. "If necessary, I will take over as moderator." In the brush, there was an odd shadow moving about. They appeared to be being followed and observed. Itachi chose not to participate in this one. It was likely the quickest way to get his dysfunctional genins to practice working together. They could see the shore a short distance away, and the forest had started to give way to more level grassland. The three bored teenagers were glad of the change in scenery and started to look around, their faces brightening once more at the prospect of leaving the stupid forest. It was evident that Sasuke had begun to forget all of the abuse Naruto had inflicted on him and was starting to settle into a rhythm, feeling secure in his abilities. This is simply too ideal. It's probably a good reminder to always be on your guard. The trio of shinobi in disguise launched an assault. Since it was obvious that neither he nor the other Konoha ninja were their target, Itachi skillfully sidestepped the first Chunin's attack and allowed him to continue. One of them raised his signature weapon and swung swiftly in on the 3 genins protecting the elderly man. It was an amazing set of retractable claws designed to cut and pierce both muscle and sinew. Sasuke grinned. Then saw that Naruto was also grinning. "Bitch, why are you smiling? Before your mother has a chance to hold your sobbing face, I will remove them." Even he thought that sounded cheesy, so he quickly changed it to some less humiliating slurs after he was. When Hinata intervened, Byakugan activated, causing eerie veins to pulse around the eyes. With chakra-filled hands, she used the distinctive defensive move for which the Hyuga were renowned to deflect the razor. Sharp claw just before it sliced through Sasuke's carotid artery and killed him. With his palms already forming the seals for a Kaden Jutsu, Sasuke jerked back to focus. The things that were going to kill him were these kinds of needless distractions. He had to put an immediate end to his obsession with Naruto. Suiryuden no Jutsu. With his seals, the blonde Jinchuriki was quicker, and the enormous water dragon appeared out of nowhere. Frustrated that Naruto had eliminated him with a single move, Sasuke gave up on his attempt. He was the first. Additionally, as a side effect, the water release disregarded his fire release, preventing him from attacking. In such damp conditions, his Gokaku was unable to remain lit. "It's really uncool of you, Nimrod." Sasuke controlled his rage. Hinata had successfully thwarted one attack, but she was unable to assist with the subsequent one. As the Hake Rokuhuienshu closed his Tenketsu one by one and defended his advances, she was battling her own man, arms a blur. Sasuke launched the attack. He eliminated a wide range of movements by strategically throwing 2 kunai, which caused his opponent to twist his body in 2 different directions. He swiftly adjusted the timing, removed the paper bomb's seal, and wrapped it around another blade before hurling it in a direction that would cover the man's entire range of motion. When the shinobi realized there was no way out, his eyes widened. Naruto demonstrated extremely precise control over the water dragon's movement as it descended. He kept the seal on his face, looking as dead and uninterested as ever, and cornered the Chunin, kneeing him in the privates like a vengeful ex-lover. "In relation to past lovers, I hope that crazy woman Ino leaves my case as soon as possible." Sasuke turned on his Sharingan and looked back at his own opponent, who was still recovering from a bomb that had exploded in his face. The hours of stamina training had been so successful that it now used hardly any chakra. Sasuke swiftly intervened, halting the man's seals with a swift kunai to the chest, his final blow, as he saw the chakra swirling in his circulatory system as he formed the seals for an unknown technique. After this skirmish was over, he would need to restock. His opponent wasn't a complete jerk, at least. With his hands still forming the seals more quickly than the human eye could follow, he ducked under the kunai. On the other hand, Sasuke's Sharingan had no trouble following the order. "Release of Earth." "You got it." He timed his leap perfectly, leaping off the ground just as it exploded, the Sharingan destroying the Doden Jutsu's efforts. The legendary Dojutsu was a truly formidable weapon. Using elevation to his advantage, he jumped toward his opponent while balancing on a small piece of overturned rock. With swift movements of his fingers and wrists, he used a point-blank Kaden Gokaku to smother the enemy Chunin. Sasuke let the enemy feel the full force of his anger, breathing heavily to add that extra burst of flame, as the watery mist from Naruto's jutsu had settled. The man fell while simultaneously attempting, rather comically, to put out his burning hair and protect his face from the flames. Sasuke took a step back, maintaining his cautious stance. He was aware that he couldn't recover from a fireball to the face, but these days, you never know. He had experienced too much random shit in the past few days to be careless. However, his opponent appeared to be unconscious and down for the count this time. Not really caring if he was hurt or not, he turned to his assignment and gave Tazuna a brief, silent glance. The elderly man's survival was merely a miracle to the Uchiha. Hinata was about as dependable and sputtered as a 50-year-old car, despite all of her all too few good moments. With that in mind, and taking into account their new friendship and partnership right away, he made the decision to dig the poor heiress out of whatever hole she had dug herself into, both literally and figuratively. In the middle of battling a Chunin class shinobi, he didn't rule out her giving up and going to bury her head in the ground, only to have it chopped off like so many dead branches from a tree. But Sasuke was a little taken aback, and rightfully so. Hinata was fending off the enemy's advances and had held her own. Although she lacked the offensive power to defeat him, her defense was remarkable for having withstood this long. Sasuke had been ready. The raven-haired Uchiha sent his own, slightly smaller, Suiryuden spiraling in the direction of the Chunin as Naruto completed his allotment. Despite being heavily splashed by the after spray, he was prepared and used his reflexes to avoid the move's most damaging part. Hinata abruptly turned to look at her savior, her visage. I'm here to smash your wet dreams. Hinata. She probably thought that little blondie would save her, like some over-the-top romance novella. A particular item around her neck was able to escape the tightness of her turtleneck sweater due to the centrifugal force of her spinning in his direction. Sasuke was taken aback. She wore a silver necklace that glowed on its own. Most likely just the sun's reflection. Distracted from the task at hand, he pondered. The glint appeared to get stronger before abruptly becoming less intense. Sasuke's heart rate was going up a few notches because of the strange urgency with which it pulsed. It beckoned angrily, calling to him, "Come on over here." "Come on." "To me." No, Sasuke didn't even think about it. All of his issues stemmed from Naruto alone. The only thing he was doing was some bullshit. Hinata-chan had absolutely nothing to do with it. He was so engrossed in that line of thought that he easily knocked out Chunin, his limbs moving unconsciously as his mind considered the consequences. That's exactly where it was. He was licking his tongue. Make that idea more tangible and concrete as he extended his hand to feel it. It's gone. Shaking his head, Sasuke awoke from his reverie and waited for the vertigo to subside. He was more worn out than he had been after training for so long. He glanced at the three fallen adversaries before abruptly returning to the here and now. An attempt had been made on their lives. In a C-rank mission, for real. In what name of heaven is this happening? The Hyuga discreetly and slowly tucked the silver necklace back into her sweater, as Uchiha Itachi observed. Noticed Naruto observing her as well. It appears that the doubt has taken root on its own without my help. His lips formed a tiny smile, which accentuated the lines on his face. The elderly man they were meant to accompany and ostensibly shield from the occasional highway criminal was tense. He is aware that we have him. He moved slowly to Tazuna's position, which was now far from the genin who was currently fighting. "No, you ass. Face," Sasuke said, as if his insult lexicon hadn't grown up with him. "I simply happen to be the better one here." The blonde Jinchuriki said, "Yes, Sasuke-kun," in a condescending, sing-song voice that his raven-haired teammate apparently detested. "If that helps you sleep at night. Do you also want me to check for monsters underneath the bed too now?" In order to prevent his younger brother from going completely crazy and starting a bloody feud with the woman she loved, Hinata was now physically restrained him. The former Anbu Jonin paid no attention to his subordinates. This was not the moment to intervene and take on the role of a parent. Actually, there was never a time for that. His deep, dark eyes met the old man they were escorting's weary ones. He said, "Tell us the truth, Tazuna-san," with a clear enunciation. A typical Anbu interrogation technique. The addendum to the previous sentence hung in the air like a broadsword hanging over the old man's bare neck, but he stopped talking at that point. "Avoid letting me make you." Tazuna took a loud gulp and tugged at the collar of his shirt. "Fine. You got me." The man was halfway through his blatantly prepared speech when Itachi raised his hand. This was not his time. "Who exactly is after you, Tazuna-san?" The elderly man gave a loud clearing of his throat. The fucking retard must be joking. With the very source of the confusion and suspicion walking with him, Sasuke had hoped to avoid the headache and the intrigue of the village as much as possible during this mission, but it didn't seem possible. Even the simpleton they were escorting, who had not evolved, had become a character from a mystery novel. I will never understand why my life is becoming like one of those retarded shinobi detective novels that Ida.ni adored. Shiroraku and his shit, goddammit. A large businessman, both in size and wealth, has decided to stop all my attempts at building the bridge that would free our little country from the chains binding it. His name is Gatu, and I'm afraid he has the resources to hire hordes of mercenaries, the most fearful of them being. Sasuke didn't want to hear another fucking lament from another troubled soul, so he said, "Oh, will you shut your fucking trap already? Already, get to the motherfucking point." As soon as he saw his brother giving him his renowned death stare, his face went completely white. "I'll make you wish you were dead with just one more word." He closed his jaws and gulped loudly. One should not underestimate Ida.ni's rage. His brother turned to the elderly man and said, "Continue," encouraging him to speak. Even as he said, the demon from the village of the mist, Momochi Zabuza. The most fearful of the mercenaries is one in every shinobi's bingo book. He shuddered, as though the killer's name would somehow transport him to their location. "I believe I was called." The god of sadism was having a great time with their team for some reason. The same man showed up on the scene as though his name had called him. Actually, there were two intruders. A spiky-haired man wearing a mask and his feminine sidekick. As if the opening to his butt had been welded shut at birth. The masked man's face was always twisted. The tyranny next to him, for some reason, also didn't contribute much to his perceived threat. Given the incredibly ambiguous appearance that he was presenting, it appeared as though he had undergone multiple sex change operations. Sasuke couldn't stand this pantomime show nonsense any longer. He stepped forward, created the seals for a Kaiten, Ryusenka, and willed his Sharingan to activate. This time, Naruto, you will not be able to outdraw me. But this time, Hinata was the one who had decided to have sex with the Uchiha. The silver necklace she was wearing flashed in the mid-afternoon sun as she spun around, having already launched a fierce offensive against the she-male. Sasuke began, giving the guy with the sword a chance to get close. Only when Zabuza was within an inch of Sasuke's neck did he realize exactly where he had previously seen the necklace. He ducked and engulfed the assassin in a fiery dragon's wrath, sending his burned body flying backwards. His chakra was severely depleted, and Sasuke retreated, watching for life. He's probably dead, but bitches like him typically get away with these near-death experiences. Behind him, he saw a sudden movement. He stretched his eyes as far as he could while he craned his neck. He caught a glimpse of Naruto's face as he charged at him brandishing Zabuza's sword out of the corner of his eye. He saw everything at once, the raging craziness that radiated from the lifeless mask he typically wore. His face threatened to split in two as a psychotic smile played on it. It kept growing unnaturally wide until his razor-sharp teeth were all visible. What? Never before had Sasuke witnessed such a perplexing and terrifying scene. Naruto took a quick step forward and was suddenly at arm's length. His eyes were on the verge of popping out of their sockets as his smile grew even wider. The Uchiha could only stare limply into those insane eyes as the blonde swung with all of his strength, matching Naruto's deranged gaze with his own Spartan one. Sasuke-kun, came from Hinata's voice in the distance. Hinata. Hina. Hina. Mori. He was still just watching what was happening around him when suddenly a kunai emerged and protruded from Naruto's forehead. As blood spurted from the wound in fountain. Like spurts, his eyes rolled back into his head. Before the Jinchuriki released the hilt, the swing lost all of its force and merely touched the side of Sasuke's neck. Sasuke saw it slide to the floor down his hunched right shoulder. He kept staring at it as it slowly dropped to the ground, his eyes half dead. He didn't notice the warm wetness spreading across his shoulders and torso, but his blue sweatshirt was stained from the blood fountain. He caught a glimpse of someone standing behind him in the glint of the sun. He recognized the owner of the voice he had been hearing so often over the past few days, ever since his brother had used that insane genjutsu on him, in the drab reflection the blade offered. He had a sense of purpose and gravity in his blue-green eyes that he simply could not have. His disheveled hair matched the color of his haori, which was as white as new snow. Child, the war never ends. It simply keeps on existing, in one form or another, much like an immortal deity. There is only one option for the warrior or assassin. Like the war, they also have to endure. Because there is still something that needs to be protected. If not as it was, then at least as it might and will be. Get up, kid. Release yourself from the bonds that have bound you. Those deeply reflective eyes still gazed into his own through the reflection. Get up and embrace your savior. There was a loud clang as the sword hit the ground. Blink. Sasuke opened his eyes and looked directly at Naruto, who was observing him from a considerable distance. The face of the Jinchuriki was completely expressionless. This time, for some reason, the sight of him did not anger him. Rather, it made him feel a profound remorse, the kind that comes from looking at someone who is immune to punishment. The sword at his feet was a mirror of the moment just before, or more accurately, that moment had been a mirror of this one. He turned around and flinched at the sharp pain from the gash on his neck. At least that had been real. With a kunai pierced deep into his forehead, Momochi Zabuza's charred body lay on the ground. The tranny's scream, "Zabuza! Sama!" was barely audible over the raging flood of ideas in his head. Something very important seemed to have slipped his mind. Something he'd seen and recalled only moments before. He found it difficult to remember what it was that had prompted him to act, but that one fact lingered tantalizingly in the back of his mind, further tormenting the poor, troubled Uchiha. What the fuck? Prior to going all animal on Sasuke, Uchiha Itachi grabbed the frantic adolescent boy or girl. Taking him by the torso, it was unquestionably him now. Itachi casually flicked his wrist to disarm him, making the man drop the needle he was clutching. He threw him to the ground and bound his wrists to the back of his head. The child's expression was one of defiance. His eyes were still fixed on Zabuza's body in a panic, as though he hoped that his intense gaze would somehow bring the former Kirigakure Jonin back to life. He gave Hinata and Naruto a nod. Itachi approached him and the two of them stepped forward, each clutching one of their prisoner's arms. However, he saw a sudden spur of movement behind his head before the Uchiha could use his renowned genjutsu on him. Whoa! With just one hand, he can create seals. He had vanished, leaving behind a geodesic array of mirror, like ice sheets, even as he was thinking that. Itachi was astounded by the skill with which they were made. Obviously, this youngster had found his Kekkei Genkei early in life and had dedicated a significant amount of time to learning it. Before he knew it, Sasuke and he were being hit by those obnoxious needles. Numerous of them were pointed directly at critical locations. Itachi was impressed. He deflected all of the tiny, fast pins away from himself and into the mirrors by flexing his fingers and drawing his own kunai. They all broke down one by one, but the child was nowhere to be found. Itachi's original intention suddenly came back to him. He spun around and saw his prisoner, Sasuke, following, making off with Zabuza's body. With a resolute expression on his face, his brother pursued him while holding the sword on his shoulder. Itachi released them, preferring to console Tazuna, who had huddled into a ball at the path's edge, shrieking docilely to avoid death. "Get up, Asen," he said, tapping their recipient's back. At Itachi's touch, Tazuna erupted, unfolding like a tautly wound spring. The elderly fool's face was green with fear and nausea. This mediocre could accomplish anything, like a pair of assassins. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his bingo book. Although it was somewhat of a tradition to keep these as unkempt as possible, Itachi's copy appeared to be brand new and most likely still smelled like it had just been printed. The Uchiha Jonin were like this. Everything had to be flawless and in its proper place. That meant that Sasuke would need to be disciplined to stop acting rudely now. Even though Tazuna was now mopping his face even more quickly, perspiration still trickled down his face and onto the front of his upper garment. "Oh, Kami-sama." Hinata furrowed her brow in disgust. However, Naruto maintained his usual lack of emotion. Itachi bit his finger with a flourish, crossing Momochi Zabuza's bingo book entry with a line of his own blood that ran diagonally across the page. When the Hokage returned, a copy of this page would be summoned to his office and placed on top of his files for review thanks to a seal that was activated by this action. Itachi always thought that using Kachiyose to move objects was a pretty clever trick. So there's one less missing nin to be concerned about. What a feat! Tears of joy are streaming from my eyes. Itachi had always doubted the honor that the masses, in their ignorance, were supposed to believe in. Killing missing nin, treating an enemy with respect rather than dishonesty, and trying to live a moral life were all ideas that were real but only existed in the imaginations of idealists like the Fourth. From an early age, Sarutobi Hiruzen was well aware of the obligations and sins a shinobi must commit in order to even begin to shoulder the weight of duty and responsibility placed upon him. The farce was more than justified now, as Genin and Chunin's graduation ages were at an all-time low. Sasuke and Hinata, two mere children, were taken on such life-threatening missions that they themselves chose on their own initiative. This is where Itachi's extreme realism caused him to be so disdainful of the life of a typical ninja. Itachi believed that the only thing that should motivate a person was what drove them to surpass their physical and mental capabilities in order to accomplish their goals. It was the feeling of inadequacy, the insecurity of superiority, and the pitiful need to do good that he found most annoying. Nevertheless, the same fucking ideals were present everywhere he went. That's why his current Genin team was, in a sense, refreshingly interesting. Sasuke's intense jealousy, Hinata's sensual desire, and Naruto's incomprehensible motivations filled a void in his mind that he had never anticipated. Raising his eyes from the sniveling old man, Itachi met Naruto's inquisitive gaze. Itachi nodded, and Naruto's expression abruptly changed. He said, "I think we must follow Sasuke," in a slightly worried tone. With eyes gleaming with agreement, Hinata turned to face him. After a disdainful pause, the blonde grudgingly added the honorific, "Who knows what that teenager is capable of? Come, Hinata, let's go." Itachi. Sensei can handle Tazuna-san, which sent the geezer shivering once more. Once more, the prodigy from Uchiha simply watched with a sly smile. He had witnessed Sasuke's distress when he saw Hinata's necklace. He was unable to understand why he had given up so quickly and let Zabuza approach him in the first place. "My younger brother seems to be falling apart from the inside out." Tazuna became even more alarmed as his smirk turned into a broad smile. The three men posed a greater threat to the old man's life than anyone else, so he had somehow selected the worst team to keep him safe. Sasuke pursued the tranny tenaciously as he raced through the forest. Dodging the numerous traps and explosive seals the man continued to drop in his wake. After that genjutsu or whatever had rendered him inactive and let Naruto steal his kill, he wasn't going to let him escape. His target fell to the ground and skidded to a stop as the tree line started to thin out once more. Sensing his chance, Sasuke lunged in to give the child's carotid artery a brief stab. With kunai already in his hand, he swung wildly at the bare skin, but the child repelled the blow with a blade of his own, causing a startling resistance. The weight of the sword he was carrying reminded Sasuke that he had a powerful weapon with him that he could test out on the child as he leapt back into a more combat-based fighting stance. He practiced a few swings with the strangely shaped sword, watching the tranny grow increasingly agitated at the Uchiha's indifference to his late companion's blade. A dull pain throbbed in Sasuke's neck. The nick had been deeper than he had initially believed. I have to kill him quickly. Here, time is not on my side. He could feel the other two approaching from behind. His lips curled into an agitated snarl as he scowled. This was his rival. On this particular one, he truly didn't require Naruto's help. With intricate swings and combos that would have taken anyone else months, if not years, to master, he danced forward on the balls of his feet. With a determined expression on his face, the tranny released the body. He appeared to be tracking the sword with his eyes. Sasuke wasn't shocked because any skilled combatant would have to pay close attention to the weapon that was going to maim them. With each countered attack, each blow that made the child flinch before him, Sasuke's confidence grew. Maybe all the training he'd done to get rid of the ghosts in his head was paying off. His strength had grown exponentially, and he was quicker and more perceptive. The Uchiha fought the urge to smile as the parrying continued, with both shinobi merely glancing at each other's nicks and scrapes. Because he was relishing this intense battle. The euphoria of not knowing if his next breath would be his last was what the warrior's blood, which flowed through him, craved. It appeared that Naruto and Hinata had arrived, but neither had stepped forward to assist the 13-year-old. In a sense, he was grateful for that, but the conceit that permeated every part of his being asserted that it was his entitlement. Before he would let them assist in any way, he would rip this small tyranny in two. Perhaps assist in bringing the bodies back to Ida. Knees feet. Oh, it would be a proclamation of my independence. But apparently, fate had something quite different in store for him that day. The child increased the stakes even more with apparent willpower. The Uchiha was encircled by slabs of ice on all sides, forming an igloo that nobody wanted to shelter in. Naruto could handle the corpse himself. He had left it somewhere else. As Sasuke's opponent launched an attack that caused his body to speed up to an unfathomable degree, tiny pinpricks started to appear in his pain registers. That or he's just lying by using his reflections. Oh, screw me. That was painful. Sasuke's right calf was stuck with a long pin. He had skewered a tendon, but on the surface it appeared to be no more than an acupuncture treatment. The waves of pain that came with that were nothing new to the Uchiha. With a casual smirk, he took out the pin and flicked it with a quick wrist motion. The boy had made an excessive effort to conceal his behavioral traits so that his opponent's time to read them would not be impacted by any inclinations to move in a particular manner. He was competent. He did, however, have home court advantage, to be fair. The Uchiha was experiencing the effects of the gradual, anaconda-like tightening of the vice around his neck, and this was his surroundings. The temperature inside had been further lowered by the ice. His every action was suffering, and his responses to the deftly thrown pins were becoming a bit erratic. He knew that unless he broke through the ice, there was nothing he could do, and a crushing sensation came from inside his chest. The act of breaking through a single, pathetic block of ice seemed rather disgusting for some reason. Sasuke was certain that the white-haired man was responsible. A pin lodged in his cheek, just missing his eye. Sasuke recoiled and stepped back. For a foe as worthless as the tranny, he could not risk his Sharingan. Akaden's seals were almost impossible to form. He had to remain motionless to avoid becoming a pincushion from a flurry of those lethal pins. He made the decision to see what the sword could do. With expert balance, he gripped the hilt and looked for structural flaws in the chakra that held the ice prison together. There. I located it. He sprinted forward, blasted into the air, and swung down forcefully. The ice breaking a second before his sword even touched it was unexpected. As the entire structure collapsed before him, he caught a glimpse of Hinata's foot and a burst of deep blue chakra. Without a sharp tool, she had pierced the same area that Sasuke had observed. When combined with the Hake Rokufu Enshu, the Byakugan was an extremely powerful weapon. However, no Hyuga had ever applied the same chakra principles meant for fighters using their hands and arms to the feet. Neji's reputation as the so-called genius Hyuga may make people suck, but Hinata is also incredibly talented. Not too bad. He pinwheeled his arms, stumbling awkwardly, trying to avoid chopping off Hinata's leg with his swing. He rushed out of the crumbling ice and landed on the heiress, bringing them both to the ground. Sasuke prepared to be struck as the sword clanged on the floor. He jerked his eyes open as powerful arms grabbed him just before he hit the grass. He was being held by the scruff of the neck by Naruto. With a look of genuine concern on his face as he looked directly into Hinata's eyes, he was also holding her body in his other arm. After taking a full second to process the situation, Hinata turned redder than light. But credit had to be given to her. Then, a second later, she thanked him without a single stutter. With a nod, Naruto gently laid her down on the grass. His eyes went glassy and he lost all feeling as he turned to face the Uchiha. Slowly, a smug grin spread across his unattractive face. Sasuke felt his rage rise like a roiling volcano, but it subtly subsided as he realized how deeply Naruto had looked at him with disdain and disgust. He wasn't just sarcastic and uninterested. Naruto detested him as well. He felt, in a sense, freed by the sincere feeling his adversary had displayed. Free from the constraints his own mind had placed on his own abilities, free from the ongoing sense of inadequacy, and free from the persistent worry that the Jinchuriki didn't even think he was worthy. At last, he could actually know the sound of the white-haired man's voice echoed in his ears and burst into his head. There was a sense of haste and an insistent urgency in the words, as though he had to cease his actions or risk dying as a result. Sasuke couldn't understand. It meant he had to keep experiencing stress and keep going down the destructive path he had been on for the past few weeks. In his mind, the guy wanted it, really wanted it. Why should I sacrifice myself for his cause? How come I've already come to terms with his denial? I am going to go completely insane over these contradictions. Sasuke-kun. He snapped out of it when his name was mentioned. I think this moment you think we're having has lasted way too long now. Mind if I let you go now? Naruto threw him to the ground like a pile of horse shit before he could object to the gay illusion. The Uchiha hurried to his feet, forgetting his earlier realization. I'll carve you a third nostril, you egotistical fuck-wit. He said, calming himself by looking at Hinata's face. Now, this series of events was happening far too frequently. It appeared that the tyranny had gotten away. Sasuke was clueless as to how the teenager had escaped with the sword and Zabuza's body. He was also suspicious of the blonde's involvement in the whole mess. Those had to wait for now. Every time Naruto made such a complete 180-degree turn, going from hatred to indifference to condescension in a single instant, he still became furious. He needed to adjust to it, until he overcame his own pride and conceded defeat to his rage. Denial and understanding were only unrealistic hopes. He detested Naruto. The story is over. It was time to do something more interesting. The warrior continues to plod. He persists in following the path he believes to be his through ice, fire, and blazing winds. He bears his burdens through tragedy and grief without even scowling. He has come to terms with his fate as the consequence of his own deeds, both honorable and shameful. He maintains his composure despite being on the verge of death, opting for a final assault rather than a safe escape. The warrior, honor, bound to his word, despises and condemns anyone who disobeys the sacred rules he has chosen to follow. The warrior is an idiot who will die for his honor and be revered to the highest levels. However, what use does that admiration serve? What, I wonder, is the purpose of extinguishing the spark of one's life for a myth that society demands you maintain? The assassin comes in. His persona is as quiet as the night and too much like the dark. Without mercy. Clever. He stands on top of the pile, grinning at the foolishness of the world, using his intelligence to influence, trick, and betray anyone in order to get what he wants. These animals, who feed on distrust and suffering, frequently employ techniques that would disgust their fellow humans. Their victims typically don't even have time to scream before their lives are taken from them, usually in an instant. Sadism comes to them as naturally as breathing. Their blatant disrespect for the honor code. The book was closed by Nara Shikamaru. Out in the garden, a shimmer of heat was forming from the mid-afternoon sun's bright rays, lending everything a fleeting, ethereal quality. The sound of the crickets' loud chirping had become quite annoying. There was no need for a diversion for the 13-year-old. His gaze swept across the veranda. The path where his father was killed had been cleared of all blood traces by the arrival and departure of the servants. Normally drowsy and unaffected by his environment, his eyes were sharp and focused. Setting the book aside, he grabbed the kunai that was resting close to his thigh and started to turn it over in his hand. Before it returned to his outstretched palm to be thrown once more, he threw it up and added a random number of rotations to it, spinning it 3 times, once, twice, and 5 times. Dawdling around was definitely not the point at this moment. Beside him sat Yamanaka Ino, who, for once, was dressed modestly. The blonde was sufficiently familiar with the Nara. Their families had been on the team since the Shodai's era, perfecting those gay combo attacks that they were so excited to see their children execute. Naturally, none of the three Ino Shikacho of this generation believed in them. They sought to make a difference by developing new abilities and jutsus that would increase their personal power. But for the past 2 days, all of the training for that under Asuma Sensei's supervision had been neglected. Ino's eyes were filled with worry as she gazed at her friend. Shikamaru's unavoidable character transformation following his father's premature passing was too significant for the Yamanaka to comprehend. Since the funeral, he had not spoken, and even then, he had only done so to pay his respects to the great man. His eyes appeared more gaunt and deep-set than before, and a hardness to his features had suddenly appeared. In 2 days, Nara, who was already too old for his age, had grown 20 years older. Shikamaru flung the blade toward the lawn with a quick flick of his hand, the black metal glistening as it touched everything nearby. It surprised Ino. The kunai was going in the wrong direction. Despite his laziness and lack of use, he had always received perfect scores on the majority of his tests, which was evidence of his brilliance. He was an expert in both theory and practice. Ino surmised that he must have missed intentionally. Almost everything the Nara did was premeditated and based on logic. It was intentional, just as she had guessed. He made the seals for the shadow jutsu that his clan was known for with a well-practiced motion. It sent the shadow at a speed Ino had never seen before, slicing through the plethora of shadows the grass's waves had cast on the ground before catching up to the black shadow cast by the whizzing blade. Abruptly it lifted off the ground, traveling along the path where the blade would block the light, until it came to rest beside the kunai. Ino saw the weapon's path change ever so slightly as the black tendril gave it a quick little nudge in midair. Thunk. It landed more than 50 feet away, in the precise middle of the target at the far end of the garden. For the first time that afternoon, Ino felt a wave of relief wash over her as she relaxed. Shikamaru had taken advantage of the shock and frustration of his father's passing to concentrate on his training. He'll be an even better village protector than his father ever was, she thought. The Nara, however, was not thinking about such things. Despite its macabre nature, his normally distracted brain had found a reason to work on it. He needed to discover his father's killer. Additionally, force that cowardly bastard to choke on his own blood and die as a result of a kunai being forced down his throat. And another in the same spot where his father had been stabbed in his forehead. Just. You. Hold on. He held another kunai, which rotated with each forceful thought. The dark embers smoldering in Ino's eyes were something he had conveniently overlooked. Rejoicing, rebuilding, or constructively moving on were not appropriate at this time. It was time for retribution. Now is a great time to enjoy your fucking worthless life. Because I'll be wrapping it up shortly. The wooden trunk target was in danger of being split in two by the force of his kunai throw. Very soon. You let him get away? The 3 genins were pierced by Uchiha Itachi's jet black eyes. Beside him, Tazuna.san was mopping. The news didn't seem to have much of an impact on him. There was nowhere lower to go down that hole, so maybe that was why he was already so terrified. He was surprised that none of his 3 genin appeared at all frightened. A look of indifference emanated from Naruto's expressionless face. At that moment, Hinata still appeared to be on the verge of having a stroke. In terms of his appearance, Sasuke appeared to have regressed towards the mean. The Jonin grinned. Never mind. He turned and began to walk in the direction of the enormous bridge that loomed in the distance, ignoring Tazuna's vacuous protests at the attitude of his escorts. They had no luxury at all, including time. The Uchiha legend wanted to be present when everything fell apart because things in the village were just starting to get out of hand. It took them very little time to complete the remainder of their rather eventful journey. Zabuza had chosen to honor them with his presence and hasty departure just as they were about to arrive at the small village where Tazuna lived. That was incredibly brief and pointless in terms of cameos. Itachi had a suspicion that they had seen the dreadful assassin from the mist before. His entry into each village's bingo book wasn't because he foolishly charged in without a plan. He had a way of avoiding such near-death experiences. Itachi had no doubt that the man would attempt Tazuna's death at least once more. There must have been other thugs for Gadu. It was possible, too. The gathering went silently on. Once they were through the village gate, Tazuna took the lead, steadily regaining his composure with each step. Since he was in familiar waters, he genuinely thought that nothing bad could happen to him. Hinata appeared somewhat irritable, but that might have been caused by anything Naruto had done. It was time for the poor heiress to move on from this period of unwavering love. Her distress was not alleviated by Naruto treating her like a mischievous fly. In any case, Itachi intended to discuss her with the Jinchuriki. The Uchiha reasoned that although she was on their side at the moment due to the wool she had pulled over Sasuke's eyes, her strong sense of justice and honor would eventually triumph over her emotions. And eventually, in due time, she would have to be removed. Itachi frequently questioned why Naruto had managed to keep her alive. You can't deny that her misplaced love is funny, but still, it's important to consider the wider picture. Tazuna went up to a house a short distance from the main road. It looked sturdy and well made, though a little worn down. He gave the door a loud knock. With the cheeriness of a wilted flower, a female voice said, "It's open." A few seconds later, they all five went in. There was utter, oppressive silence in the room. While waiting for a response to his query, Sarutobi Hiruzen drummed his fingers on his wooden desk. A minute went by. The ceiling fan persisted in its slow rotation, failing to dissipate the heat. 2 minutes. Instead of speaking, the teenager chose to look directly into the Sandame's eyes with defiance. Hitaki Kakashi appeared to be lost in thought as he leaned against the wall on the opposite side of the room. 3 minutes. Stubborn child, say something. The Hokage was fuming with anger inside. Anger at his own powerlessness, his incapacity to prevent chaos at the slightest provocation. He was responsible for Nara Shikaku's death, but he refused to let another adolescent follow in his footsteps. Shikamaru needed to be rescued from himself because the repercussions of the opposite scenario were too disastrous. It was a very straightforward question. Its goal was to help the troubled genius open up and share his actual thoughts with another human being in order to heal him. However, the old man's recent treatment by his subordinates was anything but human. His haters and those of the root only held contempt, while the most devoted members of his Anbu had begun to acquire curious looks in their nods of obedience. By describing his pacifism as feeble and unworthy by his prior standards, the elders were starting to lose faith in him. He had attempted, but failed, to convey to them and Danzo the delicate nature of the current circumstance. He could not say that he was not responsible for the series of events that had just transpired. He was in charge of the village's security and well-being, especially for those who gave their lives to defend it. He was too old and incompetent to be held responsible for this failure. Nara Shikaku, the chief genius behind their vast surveillance and espionage network and the head of village security, had passed away. To make matters worse, the inquiry into his death had turned up nothing at all. Nobody seemed to know anything about the incredibly strong and cunning assassin who had stabbed the Nara in the forehead at random, and no leads or evidence had been discovered. The only thing they had discovered, or rather, caught a glimpse of, was something that, if discovered, would upend Konohagakure's entire stability. A few days after the Nara's death, the lone unfortunate guard who had been rendered helpless by a genjutsu later admitted to seeing one of the intruders. 3 dark tomo and a pool of crimson were the only things he could recall from his vague and disjointed memory. Sharingan. How proudly Danzo had laughed at that information. He had his motivation and the proof to back it up. His argument to the feudal lord and the elders was so persuasive and well written that the elderly, senile fools were listening intently, leaning forward in their chairs, and looking into his cunning eyes. Danzo was an expert negotiator in addition to his other reprehensible traits. With well-chosen flattery and cunning resolve, he perverted every possible combination of the words for the good of Konoha, and every synonym he could find to win the elders over to his cause. In that series of events, Hiruzen had had nothing to say, no defense to refute Danzo's startling admission that the Uchiha were, indeed, a clan deserving of purification. Destroyed. Holy. He started to hope for something to rescue them from this mess as he watched the idiots who actually controlled the village fall prey to Danzo's antics. The one prodigy he had believed would seize the chance to help the village his father had died to defend was staring back at him from 3 feet away, looking like a murderer on death row being asked for his last wish, while the Sandame's only hope was gallivanting on some random C-rank mission with his team. Nara Shikamaru remained silent. In the past 10 minutes, not even his expression had changed. The Hokage sensed the silence intensifying and knew he would lose his mind if no one spoke for another minute. He gritted his teeth and said, "I realize the magnitude of the decision that I have placed upon your shoulders. I think you should take a few days to come to terms with it, and reach a conclusion as to what you want to do." Nothing. Bile rose in Hiruzen's throat. Dismissed, he uttered quietly. Shikamaru turned and walked away, Kakashi following, without even acknowledging him with a nod. For obvious reasons, the Jonin had been asked to follow the Nara. Not that the loser with the gray hair was doing it very well, but still. It was necessary to take precautions. The Sandame seized the closest container he could find and vomited into it as soon as the door shut behind them. He was starting to feel the effects of the stress. Danzo might have had that in mind. Until Hiruzen himself broke under the strain, say nothing and do nothing. And it appeared to be operating flawlessly at the moment. Hiruzen, who insisted on keeping quiet, had been so distraught that he had failed to notice the tall, thin man standing behind the Nara the entire time. In an attempt to prevent a headache from developing into a full-blown migraine, he massaged his temples. The outcome of this will not be favorable. Hinata's initial impression of the house was one of extreme poverty. As a prosperous village, Konoha's economy was supported by the steady stream of missions that its shinobi superiority demanded. She was also the heir to the powerful Hyuga clan, who could lavish gold leaf on the entire town without even slightly depleting their fortune. However, she could tell by the broken window panes and the unkempt appearance of the house that the family and the village had not received any real income in a long time. They were met by a woman who appeared to be Tezuna's daughter. She had a motherly grace about her, even though her face was prematurely wrinkled. After giving each of them a worried glance, she stepped forward to shake Itachi's hand. Her hold appeared a bit shaky. "I presume my father will be in your care for the next few days?" she asked. Maybe, Hinata thought, it was the starvation. Her inquisitive gaze was met by Itachi, who calmed her. He put his hands on hers and spoke in a comforting tone. Tezuna shifted guiltily and swallowed hard, saying, "Do not worry. I assure you that your father's safety will not be compromised in the slightest. I am Uchiha Itachi, and this is my team of genin, who are, by all means, extremely qualified to handle a task of such nature as this." Probably for the first time in weeks, the woman grinned. Although Hinata felt sorry for their state, there was nothing she could do to assist them other than to keep Tezuna safe until the bridge was finished. The businessman who controlled the sea routes connecting their island to the mainland would only then be able to free them from his oppressive grip. The woman went on, "My name is Tsunami," and motioned for them to enter and take a seat. Sasuke was about to launch into a narcissistic, profanity-filled tirade about how he wasn't a child when his brother's stern gaze cut him off. "You children must be tired. Let me whip something up for all of us, shall I?" The Uchiha appeared to become even more enraged when Naruto suppressed a laugh. His cheeks were burning red with anger as he simply sank into a chair. Heading to the kitchen was Tsunami-san. Tezuna abruptly said, "I am sure my grandson will be thrilled to meet you," as though he had just remembered. Hinata hoped for the 1000th time that Sasuke would change his sulky, impolite demeanor as he rolled his eyes. "I'm not sure why you're so angry, Sasuke-kun, but that doesn't excuse your behavior." "Inari," he exclaimed, "come downstairs for a second." After a short silence, a child said, "I don't want to," in a nasal, pouty voice. Tezuna turned around, a mopping towel already on his face and in his hands, and shook his head. "I apologize for his terribly rude behavior, but he's not used to being around company. Or even liking other people, for that matter." Itachi flicked his hand dismissively and waved the apology away. They had not bonded with the villagers. They had come there to protect them. The Hyuga heiress felt a little depressed at the heartless indifference. It was a little child, after all. How much compassion was required to care for one child? Once more, Tsunami-san entered with a tray of glasses. When Naruto got up to assist her, his fingers unintentionally tipped the tray over, causing the red watermelon juice to spill all over the carpet. Even in Konoha, watermelons were pricey, so Hinata could see how depressed she was. She also noticed that Naruto was apologizing profusely, as he should have, while staring at her with mock concern in his eyes. She saw Itachi just not caring and Sasuke sneering out of pure pettiness. The Hyuga occasionally detested her team. Undoubtedly, this was one of them. Tezuna. From outside the house, another elderly man was phoning their protector. With a quick glance out the window, he answered, in a moment, before turning to face the shinobi. "The volunteer workers are here. It's time to go finish the bridge." Itachi gave a nod. Eyes moving from the soiled carpet to Tsunami-san's face, Naruto waited a moment longer. As soon as she realized what was implied, she started to gently ask them to leave, saying she would take care of the mess. After a moment, the blonde turned to face Hinata. She had the sudden impression that he could see into the darkest corners of her thoughts and that she had nothing to conceal from his stare. He grinned and shrugged as he passed behind the Uchiha Jonin through the front door that was open. Feeling the chilly metal slide over her fingers, Hinata gripped the silver necklace she wore. And so it starts. The pace of the work appeared to be glacial. Sasuke suppressed a yawn once more. In the past 5 hours, their vigil had progressed from dull to tiresome to downright annoying. They were there, neutralizing the enemy's primary asset, standing watch futilely as a group of people dug up debris and added more debris to the holes they had created. Hinata and Naruto appeared to be in a similar mood over on the opposite sides of the triangle Ida.Ni had created. But the blonde had an unreadable expression on his face as he gazed out over the ocean and the incomplete bridge to the mainland. What does he have his eyes on? On the other side, Sasuke looked at the verdant forest. Nothing was there. The Uchiha was about to leave his station and give the Uzumaki a hard time because he was annoyed by another attempt to play him, but he saw it first. The green was gradually disappearing, or rather, it was hidden by something. Sasuke scratched his head and thought, that doesn't feel right. The weather and the time are not conducive to such a dense fog. With each second that went by, the gray cover grew wider and wider. Even the villagers started to notice as it started to cross the ocean and land on the bridge. The group murmured uneasily together. A few murmurs concerning Demon Mist and Gatu. Sasuke observed his brother examining it closely as well, seemingly perceiving something inside. 2 seconds later, he saw the Byakugan and the Sharingan. Fuck. He swiftly turned and willed his own dojutsu to work, looking for indications of enemy chakra in the gray mist. He almost immediately located two, and he was almost astounded by each of their signatures. No conceivable. The white and blue bodies he had seen appeared to shimmer and then vanished. Confused, Sasuke glanced around until he saw them approaching another red body. Hinata's warning, Naruto-kun, watch out, came just in time. Sasuke witnessed the Jinchuriki expertly defend himself against the sneak attack, seemingly blocking the heavy blade's attack with a skillful kunai block, even though he was unable to see what was happening clearly. He had a feeling the tyrant was planning something. He was aware of the impending event. He truly only has one skill, isn't he? Naruto was now encircled by the igloo he had used against Itachi and Sasuke could feel the child's chakra moving about with a fierce speed he had previously been unable to follow. Sasuke saw the second body of chakra plunge straight onto the Hyuga before he could even grin at his nemesis's danger. He couldn't afford to gloat while standing there. Hinata required assistance. He sprinted over to the heiress and pulled out a few kunai. Given the fog that surrounded them, fire was pointless in this situation. It turned out that the constipated jerk was still alive. The excitement washed over Sasuke once more. His target could still be recovered. That wasn't taken from him by Naruto. He moved toward the battle at a right angle and swung one of his blades directly at the sword, preventing it from severing Hinata's left shoulder. He charged into the battle and sent his opponent reeling for cover with a barrage of vicious blows. Sasuke swiftly cut off Hinata's angles as she moved forward to join the attack. This was his target to capture. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of his knee. Chan. In the dull glow of his Sharingan, he sensed a tiny flicker of approval. Ida.ni, you just wait. This mofo will be hogtied and put in front of you. Zabuza had a reason for being a Jonin and a long time missing nin. He casually ducked under Sasuke's swings and pushed the blade fiercely toward the teen's exposed torso, retreating firmly. In order to prevent the blade from skewering him, the Uchiha flattened his stomach and stepped back, exhaling the Kaden Jutsu he had been practicing. In an instant, he switched seals, made use of the surrounding mist, and was prepared with a Suiryuden. He aimed it at the spot where he had positioned his weight and fired hard, knocking his opponent off balance as he completed the swing's follow-through. Sasuke lifted both his arms, kunai in both hands, as Zabuza rolled over. He felt as though he had struck a rock as he lunged forward to stab him in the heart. His whole body felt like it was being squeezed by a heavy weight, and his vision became blurry. He glanced around frantically, seeing the prison where he had been imprisoned. With a few veins of pulsing blue chakra maintaining its pressure and shape, it was nearly pure water. His lungs appeared to be stuck, unable to move other than away from the enormous weight pressing down on them despite his desperate attempts to breathe. But he knew better than to do so. At least in that sense, his brother had done a good job of teaching him how to breathe by bringing a boa constrictor home from the forest. He had held his breath and gazed into his brother's eyes as the muscles in its body gradually sucked the life from him, sure that his Chan would come to his rescue when the time came. And then, before his beloved younger brother choked to death, he had saved the day by using a kitchen knife to cut open the snake's hold. But it felt very different this time. He caught a glimpse of two tiny, red circles staring at him through the implacable wall of water that surrounded him and the fog that surrounded it. Judging. Fading. Making calculations. He had been left to die by his brother. At least it appeared to be. There was absolutely nothing else Sasuke could do, so he held his breath. He saw a blurry figure fending off his kidnapper. He closed his eyes, assuming it was Hinata. That made it simpler to remain composed and focus. Hyuga, hurry up. He wished her luck. This shit needs to stop. The aforementioned Hyuga had just begun a vicious string of attacks, some of which she had learned from her father and inherited because they were part of the main family's lineage. Because she intended to attack with her entire body rather than just her hands, the others were entirely hers. She channeled chakra to her feet as well, extending the Hake Rokuhuienshu's reach, speed, and versatility by applying the dancing techniques she had witnessed her brother's teammate, the sole taijutsu user, Lee, execute with such agility. Though she hadn't yet named her method, ever since she went on that expedition, ideas had been popping into her head. Alongside Sasuke-kun, she was unable to identify it. The names were good, but the source of her ideas was still frustratingly obscure. She had a favorite, a name that seemed to resonate with her in an odd way. Hyakuniju Hachi Tobium. In literal terms, it represented 188 flying plum trees. This name just seemed to fit, and she didn't know why. Perhaps because everyone seemed to compare her eyes to lavender, but she always thought they looked more like plums. Perhaps it was because when she applied the technique, her chakra changed to the same color. Or perhaps it was merely a coincidence. It makes no difference. The heiress moved forward, whirling like a typhoon in spate, effortlessly sweeping away the sword swings. She could go and save Naruto-kun sooner if she put an end to this as soon as possible. In terms of experience and sheer strength, the man in the mask was far more powerful than she was. She had to find another way to gain the advantage. Although her Byakugan was assisting, she was aware that she could only use both techniques for a maximum of 5 minutes at a time because she could feel the drain on her chakra. She retrieved a kunai from her belt and hurled it forcefully, purposefully avoiding her opponent. Being a reasonably logical person, Zabuza ducked to the left as it sped over a bit too far to the right. Straight into the rising foot of Hinata. Hinata felt a strong urge to throw up as her heel struck his skull. On her very first mission, such violence, throughout her years of training, she had never inflicted any injuries. She had only used the Rokuhuienshu or kunai drills to defend herself, using her opponent's momentum against him to get the throw, the pin, or whatever winning condition her instructors had set. Death, however, was now the only winning condition. This was something she had to do. With renewed resolve, she grabbed her blade and stepped forward, surprising the reeling missing Nin. He managed to protect himself in spite of this, offering his hand as a sacrifice to prevent a stab wound to his head. He reached over and swung clumsily, just in time to catch the Hyuga's midriff with the edge. The pain made her wince as she took a step back. She noticed the gash when she looked down. It wasn't very deep. She looked again at the ice structure and grimaced. One side had a tiny hole that was getting bigger by the second. It seems like Naruto-kun is getting out. Her wrist was cleanly sliced by the assassin's blade. She ducked under his next blow, which would have severed her head, dazed. As her conscious mind struggled with the consequences of what had transpired, she continued to avoid on autopilot. They had severed her hand. There, on the incomplete bridge, she could see it, with a pool of blood already accumulating around the cut portion. She lifted her left arm to her eyes and laconically blocked another attempt at her life. It was truly gone. She was still trying desperately to hold on to the silver pendant that hung around her neck, but her brain was still twitching. With each muscle contraction, she could feel her heart pounding and her blood gushing from the wound. Before she died from blood loss, she was going to die from shock. As she moved slowly, she avoided another swing. Zabuza's face was twisted, but it didn't reveal anything. That was his face all the time. That's always the case. Naruto-kun, why do you have to be that way all the time? When she finally passed out from the blood loss, she felt her legs give way. This time, Zabuza had aimed carefully. He would undoubtedly not miss a thunk. Uchiha Itachi appeared in her fading field of vision, directly between her and her opponent, while the Kirigakure Jonin had 3 kunai piercing his vital organs. Itachi must have applied his well-known genjutsu to him because his eyes appeared lifeless and defeated. She craned her neck, slowly turning her head as though underwater, in an attempt to catch a glimpse of the person she loved and had gone to great lengths to keep safe. He had also dealt with his target. He sat on his haunches beside his fallen foe, as if he were performing some kind of ritual. As he lifted the blade he was holding above his face and turned his nose up to the black metal, his silhouette appeared remarkably wolf-like. He waited expectantly. He had to enjoy the moment. The heiress saw the red drop land on his extended tongue from the pyramidal weapon's point. Her final conscious thought was one of utter confusion and bewilderment. Naruto-kun, what the devil are you doing? What exactly was that? Darkness. The blonde replaced the kunai where he had discovered it, deep within the child's rib cage, and licked his lips. Once he had struck at one of his many weaknesses, it had become easy to take the troubled child out. The simplest of all was to rationally and methodically undermine his reason for existing in order to manipulate his brittle sense of self-worth. It was easy sailing after the Jinchuriki had determined the reason behind the preteen's altercation. There was only one reason for his life, his whole commitment, and his intention to kill, for the benefit of his master. As he dodged his ice picks, Naruto continued to speak, calmly disputing with a more agitated Haku about his use of the Kirigakure Jonin. He was able to emphasize that the Momochi's life would have been the same if he had never existed in the first place. Instead, it would have been preferable. Naruto relished the sight of the fire fading from his naive eyes as he saw his attacks lose accuracy and speed. As he tried to deny it, to rationalize it, to get rid of the demons the blonde had placed in his head, he watched with delight as the effeminate orphan finally collapsed to his knees, his face perspiring and his eyes darting wildly from one unimportant spot to another. However, he felt that nothing even approached the peak of his annoyance. Without showing any emotion, he simply watched as his opponent spread-eagled himself on the igloo's wall and quietly asked to be relieved of his suffering. It was such a drastic admission of defeat that even he couldn't help laughing. He had refused to comply. Not right away. Naruto was still not satisfied. The blonde did nothing but watch as his demands grew louder over time. As Haku started pleading to be killed, he grinned sadistically. The whispers quickly became frantic screams, pleading with the Jinchuriki to stop staring with that blank expression and to put an end to the situation immediately. Why won't you do it? Why? 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 When he finally made the decision to slit his heart metaphorically with the black blade, it was at the height of his despair. The cold prison he had spent years perfecting cracked and broke as it escaped from his rear. The dead body was pushed out in a shower of broken ice by the thrust's momentum. Naruto released the blade and enjoyed the rush of colder, denser air from the now shattered enclosure. He moved directly into the scene where he witnessed Hinata-chan have her hand amputated. Almost instantly, he witnessed her enter post-traumatic shock and turn to the one comfort she believed was available to her. The blonde Jinchuriki ignored her frantic attempt to establish a human connection and went about his daily routine. He just watched the mist dissipating from their surroundings, watched Sasuke break free from his watery prison and fall to his knees, coughing and hacking, and let himself a single smile as the enticing drop landed on his tongue, mirroring Hinata's descent to the ground. A single, contented, sublime smile. Quiet. It was a deafening sound, and it meant more than the conclusion of a life-threatening battle. It represented the end of a person's will to live as well as the end of their hopes and dreams. Hopes and dreams have no place on the battlefield. You can't expect to keep them safe here. Chilly, drab gray. Pointless. Nothing at all. The boy gazed at the body below him in blankness. The silence was broken by the Uchiha boy's grunts and gasps. Naruto growled. So gray, so drab, so frigid. What's the point? How about we murder them all? Sosuke, a young boy, grinned at him. Is that going to be enjoyable? After all, isn't it your responsibility to stir things up when they're chilly, drab, and gray? Have you had enough of tinkering with your food? Never forget that people are the most fascinating things in the world. Chilly, dull, and fucking gray. The snarl backed off. He appeared to awaken from his fever dream. Sasuke Uchiha vomited. His head was spinning, his focus unclear. He seemed to ramble on and off in his thoughts. He fell. Things seemed clearer when he woke up next. Though he was afraid to open his eyes just yet, he could sense his mind recalling what had happened. He heard his mind say, Hinata, Hinata, Hinata. My goodness, her arm. His mind reenacted the incident for him as if it had been prearranged. He trembled. And the girl had done her best to avoid and weave through the attacks, even in the face of the most excruciating pain imaginable. Naru. He was unwilling to finish the thought. The drop of blood onto the boy's tongue, which matched the girl's fall with almost divine accuracy, felt suddenly very sinister. It grabbed hold of Sasuke's neck and crawled up. He kept replaying the scene, feeling fear coursing through him like venom. A single, contented, sublime smile. Uchiha Sasuke's eyes snapped open, and the intense light nearly hurt his eyes. He took a seat. His limbs were pain-free, but his body felt heavy and rigid. He swiftly fixed his gaze on his older brother. Sensing the movement, Itachi turned and grinned. All right? For a brief moment, Sasuke nearly grinned. It felt like the old Itachi, the brother he had admired as a child, was back when his brother said those words. But as soon as the boy with the blonde hair appeared, that moment was gone. His image of his Ida.ni appeared to cloud when he looked at them both in that way. After a while, he finally looked at Hinata, the Hyuga heiress. When he saw her lying down, motionless, his eyes widened. However, upon closer inspection, he saw that she was breathing. He let out a breath. Once, twice. She was okay, it would be okay with her. She'll be fine. He recognized Naruto's voice. Wella almost. Sasuke could see the change. The cold stares and sneers had vanished. The boy with the blonde hair appeared depressed about their female teammate's condition. Take some time. Some rest would do you good, then we should be off. Sasuke was appreciative of what his older brother had said. It had less to do with the physical strain his body had endured. He was certain that his brother had successfully cured them. Processing what had happened was more important. He turned back to Naruto. He had approached the heiress and held her unconscious body in his own, doing his best to be the rock she sorely needed. Sasuke forced himself to wake up and get to his feet, even though his mind was screaming for sleep. They were accompanied. What the fuck? Gato wasn't typically surprised by surprises because he was a somewhat shady businessman with a number of sinister interests. But he'd lost his shit entirely this time. Assured by the great demon Zabuza that it would be devoid of occupants by that time, he had reached the partially completed bridge with assurance. The scene that was about to happen was completely different. Workers and sullen, dejected villagers milled about listlessly, something dulling their desire to get the job done. Gato was stymied. Even though they were being held at gunpoint, they typically hadn't stopped working. It was just one of the many things about those cretins that he detested. However, there was no cheering today despite the fact that his killer and his sidekick were lying dead in front of them, not a party. The center of the bridge was the focus of every eye that wasn't diverted by the sound of the waves. Another, who had apparently had her hand severed, lay there in the tender embrace of a blonde teenager. Her skin had gone deathly pale, and her blood was all over the place. He seemed to be comforting her with calming condolences whispered in her ears, and the businessman could see the girl crying quietly into her lover's arms. Ignore that. That didn't interest him at all. He had brought misery and pain wherever he had gone, converting those wretched, pointless villages into his sweatshops and charging outrageous prices for goods made there. The two gentlemen standing in front of him, their faces slightly irritated, were what truly made him pause. Well, 1.5 gentlemen. The shorter one appeared to be having a bad hair day, while the taller one had her long hair pulled back in a short ponytail. Their strange, red, filled eyes were staring at him, and he was struggling mightily to focus. The world paused for a moment. He kept staring into those eyes, which were so dazzling, so sharp, and so damn red. Red. His thoughts were dull and lifeless as he floated in a sea of color. You have to go now. A persistent voice seemed to enter his mind. Go, and don't come back. Gato, leave this village. Just floating away with the lilting overtones of the voice was so easy. A tear dropped from his eye and hung like a tiny diamond on his cheek. Mortal, do you understand? He nodded, eager to follow the lovely voice's instructions. Then go. Forthwith. To the other people watching the scene, it appeared as though Gato paused to consider his options before abruptly deciding not to pursue them. Instead, he chose to abandon the incomplete bridge, leaving his shocked enforcers vulnerable to two irate, capable Uchiha with a grudge. The ensuing slaughter was an unworthy spectacle. Very much so. Yank. Oh yes. I always wanted to try it with ramen soup instead of whipped cream. Kirito. Sama, she moaned. With an incredulous expression on her face, Mitarashi Anko, who had yanked the book most unceremoniously away from him, read aloud. Kakashi, the fuck is this shit? Who's this damn author anyway? Holy shit. Kakashi was aware that he had 3 choices. There were 3 options. Saying, fuck off, bitch, taking the book back silently, and purring of some kind. It was fairly simple to determine which option came from whom. As it turned out, it was difficult to tell what Kakashi's real response was. A snatch back for the book. Fuck off, followed by a purr. This surprised Anko because it accomplished something that most people had thought was less likely than characters from another manga entering their universe. What did you say? Kakashi cursed himself 100,000 times for consenting to the insanity of sharing a single physical body that Kazuki Urahara had forced upon him one day. Kaga cough. And why the fuck would you say, a cough, unless you're retarded? Because fucking whatever, man. The cage wants to meet you. What happened just now? You retards, stop responding to these things in this manner. Slow down, Mr. Smooth Guy. I understand, Kakashi. San, just relax. Fuck my life. And give it your all. Silently, Uzumaki Naruto carried the stretcher. With the exception of her chest's rise and fall, Hinata Hyuga lay still. Despite her uniform, which represented typical unconsciousness, nothing could make her arm return. Only a stump remained from the wrist. It was now wrapped in multiple layers of bandage to stop the bleeding. The boy remained silent. He had no feelings, then he grinned slowly. So far, so good. Walking silently, Sasuke also supported the stretcher from behind. Now his thoughts were racing. Did he have hallucinations? Had he actually witnessed Naruto act in a way that wasn't appropriate for the circumstances at the time? Since his grand entrance, he had always found the blonde to be highly calculative, purposefully reserved, and held back. Every word carried a heavy sense of care and expectation, and Sasuke was certain that he was the only one who could sense it. The boy appeared to be taken at face value by everyone else. Sasuke suppressed an insult and a reprieve as he watched him walk uniformly, his black t-shirt moving just a little bit. The goddamn urge to kill. He was unable to explain it. It was just not logical. He had not realized that killing meant ending someone's life until Shisui was declared dead. That was all there was to it. The individual had vanished. Furthermore, the boy in front of him had only agitated him a few times, so he was unable to justify why he wanted that to happen. Sasuke. Ku. When he heard his name called, he yelled. Hinata was the one. She appeared to mumble and then returned to her daze. When Naruto stopped, he jerked. The blonde stood for a while without turning. Then, as though nothing had happened, they resumed their motion. Itachi remained silent. Observe your actions. By the time they reached Konoha, it was late in the evening. Up until that point, the air had been oppressive. Nobody spoke. They had made a mechanical movement. They hadn't taken a break to eat, drink, or urinate. Medic.nin had already shown up as soon as they had passed the inner gates. They must have been warned by guards. They moved quickly, covering the stretcher and leaving before there was any disturbance. After all, the patient was the Hyuga clan's heiress. The common people would never benefit from hearing about her injury. That was the end of it. There was no verbal communication. Sasuke went in one direction, Itachi in another, and Naruto in the first. The report could wait, as could the Hokage. Sasuke was certain that he would have killed anyone who had even annoyed him that night. Dazed, he wandered aimlessly back outside the gates, heading for the forest. He sat looking listlessly at his hands, losing all sense of time. Above him, something appeared to be stirring. Before he could turn his head and look up. Crack. On his clammy palms, as if from above, a single crystal appeared, brighter than the moon that night. His breath caught in his throat as he looked up. The Boreal Valley's dancer. The tale concerned a stunning princess who was born from the loins of the most powerful monarch to have ruled the age. She developed into a lovely, innocent, and unadulterated adult. She moved with the epitome of grace. The usurper then arrived. He was called Sullivan, the traitor, Sullivan. All they held dear had been usurped by Sullivan. He had won over the army and executed the king and queen. He hadn't touched the princess, which surprised me. All he had done was ask her to come with him to his homeland, the icy realm of Irithyll. The princess had done as Sullivan had commanded. The night her parents had died, she had died inside. Nothing else was worth living for. She had nothing but the ruthless pontiff Sullivan, the usurper. How could he be, though? He hadn't treated her cruelly at all. Just comfort, freedom to do as she pleased, and the politest of smiles. Then one day he had summoned her. Sullivan was a tall, hooded, and enigmatic man who looked like a beast to the princess. He had also given her a look. His right eye was dead, but his left eye was shining. He had raised his twin swords to kiss her, one pulsing purple with darkness and the other blazing with fire. Protect the valley. You will die one day, dancer, but in the meantime, you will writhe in your own misery. Thus was born the dancer of the Boreal Valley. The twin swords were welded to her arms, and her armor had merged with her body. Her knees were broken, and her sanity was stolen. She had to crawl. However, she had been asked to protect the valley by Sullivan. She was thus chained to the palace of the valley's ceiling, shrouded in darkness, breathing frost, and shrieking silently, waiting for someone cloaked in light to dismantle the chains that held her there so that, when she eventually fell, half female, half animal, she would finally let out her madness and meet her demise at the hands of this glorious champion of light. When Hitsugaya Dashiro was just a toddler, the story had left him severely scarred. It had simply been lying there, among all the books in his home. The young boy had also reached for the book. He had always been captivated by the deep blue cover and enigmatic appearance of the Dancer of the Boreal Valley. From the outside, it had appeared to be a children's fairy tale, but it was anything but. He had been troubled and confused by the conclusion. There was no explanation. It appeared as though the book was fueled by the reader's imagination. And that was what had intrigued him each time he had read the story, repeatedly as a child. They've sealed the traitor. Finally, the hollows have been put down. All he felt was hollowness after hearing the news. Perhaps he had already realized that Sosuke Aizen was far too insane to ever be contained. He was aware that he would eventually have to pursue and destroy the 5th squad captain himself. However, he was now broken. A person's empty shadow. He had cut himself off from everyone and stayed in a cave by himself for days, unable to muster the strength to draw his sword. Thus was born the Dancer of the Boreal Valley. So was that it? Was he turning into the story's dancer? He had never been confronted directly by Aizen. On a whim, he had merely taken him out, dismissed him, and confined him to seclusion. And the young genius with the white hair had always been concerned about that. Nothing seemed to be known about Sullivan the traitor. The narrative had merely presented him as a villain without elaborating on his character, motivation, or drive. Grinning, Hitsugaya Toshiro savored the evening breeze. The still wind had taken on a chilly edge, as if it were a knife brushing against his flesh. Hitsugaya grinned. In the cold, he had always felt comfortable. There was something fleetingly beautiful about being cold that drew his attention. The forest edge was illuminated by a shower of brilliant crystals as the ice wings moved. The boy with the raven hair had a trembling jaw and wide eyes. Hitsugaya Toshido touched down with a graceful landing. He smiled and held out his hand even as he approached Uchiha Sasuke. The tale will now continue. Aizen Sosuke, one last dance. I won't be as kind to you as you have been to me. That's why. Bored. Evening had given way to night. Yamanaka Ino was sitting at the family flower shop's cash register, doing everything in her power to stay awake. The worst were the days in between missions. Apart from her genin duties, her mother insisted that she assist in the shop as well, but after hours of exhausting training, it was impossible to remain vigilant in a place where no one was around to talk to. She saw him walk past the storefront just as she was ready to close her eyes, likely for a long time. Uzumaki. The blonde was hunched over, his face deep in melancholy reflection. His persona seemed to be surrounded by a real shadow, a sense of defeat that Ino found depressing simply by observing it. For a few more seconds, she watched in disbelief. She called out to him just as he was about to vanish down the other side. Naruto. The Jinchuriki came to a halt, his face showing confusion. He stepped back and looked into the flowery establishment, as though he was trying to figure out who had called. Ino, he said. The kunoichi went out into the street in compliance. What's up? She asked, trying to lighten the mood with a false sense of humor. Naruto chose to look blankly at the colorful screen behind her instead of making eye contact. Unless something had gone really wrong, this kind of reaction was totally unexpected, especially from him. Her concern prompted her to ask, "Are you all right?" She tried to soothe him by putting a hand on his shoulder. At the touch, she felt his arm stiffen, then relax again and again as he let go of the tension inside of him. He took a long, shuddering breath and let it out slowly, his posture deflating as his lungs did. He appeared as though the strain would cause him to pass out at any moment. Bringing the blonde a stool, Ino hurried inside. She firmly grasped both of his shoulders and shook him, saying, "Dude, tell me, once. What happened?" Naruto continued to avoid looking at him. He hesitated once more and muttered something too faintly for the Yamanaka to hear. Hina. She ran in again to get some water, asking, "What?" She was forgetting first aid and basic manners because of his distress. Give the traumatized person water. It lessens the tension brought on by the incident. Basic medical procedures. She recalled barely making it through that class. Pink. Wide. Forehead had also dominated that topic. With a loud gulp, the Uzumaki appeared to regain his composure. Ino held him once more while asking him in a more relaxed, low voice. Tell me. With a feeble nod, he gestured hazily in the direction of the village entrance. Never mind me. Ino was afraid of his next words. Who? What? Hinata. Chan. She glanced at the stretcher being carried by the personal doctors of the Hyuga, who were easily identified by their sky blue robes. The cloth that covered it was as white as new snow. She looked to make sure the Uzumaki was okay before launching herself into a full-fledged run to the solemn procession. No, absolutely not in this world. Not her. As the Yamanaka departed to verify or perhaps dispel her worst anxieties, Uzumaki Naruto rose from his stool, his expression once more composed and calm. He entered the store and turned to look at the one thing he had to see. He flashed one of his infrequent smiles at it. He could feel someone standing behind him. He didn't even need to turn around to say, I see. Even you can't know everything, can you, Aizen-san? A particular date was circled in red marker on the wall-mounted calendar. Why won't this nightmare stop? The Hokage's chamber balcony offered a magnificent view. The entire village, the hills beyond, and the cliffs behind could all be seen from there. It stood for the past, present, and future of the three incarnations of time. The faces of the village's past heroes etched into the stone of the cliffs symbolized the labors and sufferings of the men and women who gave their all to create the Konoha they now enjoy. The vast community directly ahead stood in for the present, the burden of responsibility that loomed over Sarutobi Hiruzen's head. He had already made far too many mistakes and knew the damage even the smallest one could do in this whirlpool of chaos. Beyond, the forest represented a time of unrestrained growth that would propel the village's prosperity to unprecedented heights. Heights are full of opportunities, both good and bad. With a deep, seated grimness in his eyes, the Sandaime gazed out at the dark tree line. But I have to halt this downward spiral right now if I want a future. Ya, called Kakashi Hitaki, another one of the people who always managed to irritate Hiruzen. With all of Danzu's schemes for his position and the unexplained killings, one might assume that the old geezer should have reached his breaking point, but the gray-haired whelp consistently disproved that theory. His expression was one of perpetual boredom, as if he were chewing on a blade of grass. The Hokage found it difficult to control his blood pressure. It was undoubtedly bad for his heart to be so frustrated. I did, yes. As you know. Shit's starting to hit the fan. Or not really, not like shit, but, you know, tiny pieces of it. The rather grim imagery caused the Hokage to grimace. Inappropriate, yet an apt summary. I'll get straight to the point. Uchiha Shisui and Nara Shikaku. Is there a connection? Will there be one? I need the answers quickly. You're dismissed? Not the slightest trace of reaction could be seen on Hitaki Kakashi's face. He simply turned after nodding. As his flak jacket clad form vanished with a poof, Hiruzen couldn't help but think about the shinobi monsters he was in charge of. What with Kakashi's sang-froid front and Uchiha Itachi's emotionless exterior concealing what may have been one of the largest jutsu arsenals a ninja at the time could have. At times, he struggled to decide whether to feel proud or anxious. After what felt like an eternity, Kakashi's mind was suddenly functioning at its normal pace. The absence of Kazuki and Yoruichi's voices gave him much needed time to do what he needed to do. First, examine both murders. Since the Hokage had made no mention of any other requirements, he was free to use any ally he wanted. Shikaku Nara, Shisui Uchiha. An uproar had been created by Shisui's horrific murder, and the investigations had come to a standstill. However, Kakashi was aware that that was meaningless. Neither the Tokubetsu nor the Anbu had been used by the Hokage. They operated in entirely different ways. Before long, he found himself outside the Anbu entrance. Only a select few could view the cases and files that were archived in Konoha's own library. The Anbu library, on the other hand, had their own versions of the cases. And that was exactly what he required. He was about to intervene when he had an epiphany. He took a kunai out of his special pocket and threw it in one fluid motion, putting the thought into action with frightful speed. As anticipated, the purple-haired Jonin sneered as he caught it rather easily. I expected you to come here. Knew the old man would have asked you to look into those murders. Wonder why he asked a fucking retard to do it, anyway. As usual, Kakashi said, I need your help. Not with Yoruichi's bite, not with Kazuki's drawl. Anko gave a coarse laugh. Damn fucking right you need it. You muck around in that library, eh? Yours. I'm off to the Nara murder site. Kakashi didn't even hear Anko go as he turned away. He grinned. That was the hallmark of a skilled killer. And a pretty impolite one at that. What a bitch she is. Ah. You treated her so badly, Kakashi-san. There we have it. Urahara was back. Kakashi used that motivation to go look for some materials instead of going to hang himself. The big glass doors opened and he stepped inside, prepared to do some serious. Hold on a second. Kakashi stopped just inside, his face displaying confusion. Clearly irritated by the generation's difficulties with reading or anything related to it, the elderly, almost dilapidated librarian tutted. Yoruichi-san is where? Kazuki gave him a cunning smile. God forbid. That night was ideal. The sky was clear of clouds. A scythe of pale white light slicing through the landscape of darkness. The crescent moon stood out in its sinister majesty. Silent and ominous, the Uchiha enclosure towered over him. Just the atmosphere he desired. Nara Shikamaru leapt through a concealed crevice in the tall walls and entered the forbidden area, which was dangerous to everyone but those wearing the fan, which was red and white. The Uchiha's emblem encapsulated the clan's whole history. The Sharingan's wielders had always been the forerunners of conflict and carnage, bringing misery and death wherever they went. The red portion represented the sacrifices they had to make as a result of their Kekkei Genkei, a blessed but cursed dojutsu. A well-known tale was told by the sheer number of Uchiha killed over trivial disputes, their internal strife, and their fierce battles with the Senju clan in the past. The fan's lower white handle represented the clan's well-known blood purity. In order to keep themselves from going extinct, even the Hyuga had to establish branches within the main family due to severe inbreeding and fertility issues. Although the Uchiha had miraculously avoided that fate, the symbol demonstrated its ever-present, menacing threat. All in all, it was evidence of their inherited affinity for Kaiten. At a time when others were learning how to make simple clones and substitutes, the Uchiha were born with an innate ability to control the elemental transformation of fire. They learned complex jutsus like the Ryusenka very early on, fueling the fire. That's exactly what the Nara were doing when they broke into their stronghold. Even worse, though, was what he was going to do next. After returning from his rounds, Uchiha Inabi put on the kettle. He had dinner and a cup of tea every day after finishing his work for the day. Ever since his wife passed away from a protracted illness, he had consistently adhered to this schedule. She had only asked him to look after himself, and he had promised to do so for the rest of his life. He put on a basic cotton gi that his wife had made for him using the best fabric she could find as the water boiled. Appreciating the warmth in his hands, he went into the kitchen, pulled out a ceramic cup, and filled it with the steaming ochre liquid. Although it wasn't particularly cold, aging had started to wear him down, and one by one, all of his joints became painful and stiff. He switched off the gas and put the brass kettle back on the stove. As he entered the living room, the inspector of the Konoha police force held the cup in both palms and took a sip. He was eager to enjoy the evening as it were by settling into his favorite chair. His fingers were steepled in front of his eyes, but he hadn't expected to see the sulky teenager taking his place. Nothing needed to be explained. Everyone in the clan had been anticipating a visit from a hired mercenary or assassin as soon as word spread that the intruder was Uchiha, and the police force had taken an active part in the investigation of the recent murders. The idea of the Nara's son physically visiting this place had never even crossed Inabi's mind. Even as he reached for the thin knife concealed inside his sleeve, his first words were, "I didn't do it." The smoldering embers in the child's eyes and his expression remained unchanged. With his ring finger brushing the tiny cut where the blade's grip should have been, Inabi pressed his fingers into the fabric, looking for the pocket that held the blade. "Are you trying to find this?" As Shikamaru suddenly made the stainless steel blade appear between his outstretched fingers. A slim shadow stretched from the blade to his own, creating the contact between the shadows required for the Kubashibari no Jutsu to work, and Uchiha, who was in his 40s, felt something grab his throat like a vice, threatening to cut off his head completely. He choked, gasping for air. His father hadn't intended to teach him this skill until he was a chunin, but he had discovered it in a musty, crumbling scroll while looking for combat texts following his father's death, and he quickly picked it up. The shadow's physical pressure was too great, and Inabi felt his neck muscles bulge to keep his arteries and trachea from closing, but it did no good. He had only 5 minutes left before the guards noticed the hole in the wall during their nightly rounds, so he had to leave and replace the fake bush in front of the opening after he had done so. "I hadn't even asked yet," the Nara muttered to himself, not even bothering to look at his victim as he strangled the life out of him. So far, Inabi had been his best option. The Uchiha had been out on his rounds right next to their sprawling residence around the time his father was killed. And, given the Sharingan, Shikamaru had lost interest in the man, and was already calculating, trying to find his next suspect. With a small, deft flick, he threw the blade right into the suffocating man's carotid, increasing the pressure of the jutsu even further. Almost as an afterthought, he threw out another tendril, catching the china mug before it fell to the ground, warning the neighbors. He abruptly let go of the technique, allowing Uchiha Inabi's lifeless body to fall to the ground. It would be too foolish to leave fingerprints behind, since he planned to do the same thing with his other suspects, so he got up and stepped over the corpse, leaving through the same window he'd entered through, opening and closing it with the shadows. He walked slowly down the main boulevard of the village, lost in thought, leaving the compound just seconds before the guard arrived. Oh, well. Another day, another victim. Hiya. Korra, Nandato? The poor guard gulped loudly. One of his nighttime fantasies was being harassed by random purple-haired women in the middle of the street and dragged into a side alley. However, in none of his dreams did the woman ever verbally abuse him to his face or appear as attractive. She held him by the front of his robes, shaking him violently, her long, manicured nails digging deep into his collarbone, but this was reality. "What do you mean that you don't know anything?" He tried very hard not to cringe, but his facial muscles betrayed him. She looked like she was going to bite his head off. Spittle flew onto his face in the most ironic way imaginable. "I'm really sorry, ma'am. I'm really sad," he stammered. Most people were affected by Mitarashi Anko, with the exception of Kakashi, who was determined to take that lout's case and ruin his life someday. However, there needed to be an investigation done first. Alright. I'll wait 5 more fucking seconds before using your fucking face as an ashtray. Okay. She took the cigarette from her lips and brought it within a centimeter of the unfortunate guard's face. Unless y'all wanna start talking, of course, she said. The guard felt the uncomfortably strong warmth as his beard began to curl and sizzle. His logical side said matter of factly, it's not really a good idea to hide things anymore. Otherwise, she'll really find more creative torture methods. Alright. Let's talk, he screamed, and she paused for a second before piercing his cheek with her butt. A-R-R-R-G-G-G-G-G-G-H-H-H. Go on. Anko wasn't in the mood for small talk. There was a cocky gray-haired fucktard to be did and a killer to find. I saw Nara Shikaku's ghost urging me to leave the area right away. Something about him seemed very insistent to A-R-R-R-R-G-G-G-H-G-H. She had poked him once more, by which time the cigarette had completely gone out. For what purpose was that? Before realizing what he had just said, he grumbled. The guard flushed. She truly is gifted by Kami. Sama, isn't she? Anko pressed close, grinning wolfishly, and his whole world fell silent, save for the sound of his own heart pounding a steady 4 quarters on his ribcage. Slap. 3 quarters. He had gone completely white, trembling in her grasp as she made eye contact and grinned maniacally, saying, skip the useless parts, or y'all get something worse than a volcano stuffed down y'all. He muttered, S. Saw someone's eyes, as if he were going to pass out. Sharingan. Anko pushed. She spat in disgust as he nodded. Once again, that fucking clan. Her eyes snapped back to him. Also, he was perspiring from the strain of trying to recall and the sheer terror Anko had instilled in him. The Baya. He passed out in her arms, his head lolling on his neck, and the final words, Bayaku. Gone. Came out in a barely audible whisper. PCH. Weakness. After tossing the sleeping guard into the back of the alley like a bag of old potatoes, the purple-haired Kunoichi walked out into the street, blended in with the crowd, and vanished almost instantly, her brows furrowed as she searched her memory for cases in which she had seen a Hyuga and Uchiha together, and then it struck her. Sasuke and Hinata, the genin. She turned and began running back to the hospital in the middle of the village. I'll strangle someone if it turns out to be them, so screw me. Me too, sister. Her sprint had been more parkour than she'd realized, and she froze in place, searching wildly for the source of the voice, but there was no one around because she was on a freaking rooftop. A few questions were answered by the silence, but 1,000 more were raised, so she pushed them to the back of her mind and hurried to the hospital. A certain Uchiha needed to be questioned. In sharp contrast to its deathly pale occupant, the room's flowers were radiant. The occasion did call for it, but Uchiha Sasuke sat next to Hyuga Hinata on the room's only chair, looking unusually dejected. Hyuga Hinata sat recuperating on the bed, not even taking her eyes off her stump of a hand for a moment. Everyone in the village knew the risks a shinobi had to take, especially in a C-rank mission that had gone as badly as this one, being so terribly under-graded and all. Most, if not all, villages would have sent a chunin loaded team for this, classifying it as at least a B rank. The question kept coming back to him, repeating over and over again. How could something so devastating have happened? A lot of apologizing would never be enough to make up for the fact that the old man fudged the details a little because his financial situation prevented him from paying for a B rank. It was a small fraud at the time, but it had cost his friend and Nakama her hand in the process. Sasuke was startled out of his reverie when he noticed that Hinata had turned her head and was now silently staring at the pink and white petals of the roses Naruto had brought her from the Yamanaka's shop. The heiress opened her mouth to ask just one question, and her eyes glazed as if she had died. Do you think he will? Itching to tell her to stop obsessing over the Jinchuriki, to let go of the ideal she'd raised him to be, Sasuke wanted to smash his head against a wall because the anger and frustration were going to drive him insane. However, he knew that only those thoughts were keeping her calm at the moment, keeping her from giving up on life itself and putting a straight razor across her throat. Uzumaki Naruto had gone home after spending the entire night there consoling the Hyuga during what could only be described as the worst night of her life. Hinata was his teammate, his literal partner in crime. He hesitated, then held her remaining hand in his, willing her to look at him. Gone were the sarcastic, expletive-filled remarks, the rude, pouty behavior, and his eternal snarl, only to be replaced by an expression of genuine concern. He had to support her. Don't worry, Hinamo. Hinata, his mind said, finding the error incredibly odd, but he decided to disregard it at the moment. She remained silent, continuing to gaze at the flowers. Sasuke was about to make a very derogatory remark about the Jinchuriki's tardiness when he noticed a teardrop forming on her left eyelid. He held back the remark and extended his hands to wipe the tear away with his finger when the room shook violently. The purple-haired woman lowered her left heel as the door slammed open, and the nurses cowered in disbelief behind her. It appeared that they had attempted to prevent her from entering, but she had literally forced her way in. You are who the fuck? With a blank expression on her face, Hinata seemed unimpressed by the profanity coming from someone as old as her son, if she had ever had one. She picked up the Uchiha with one hand and tossed him carelessly against the wall across from the bed. Sasuke challenged the newcomer. Kun Sasuke. First words, huh? With an angry expression on his face, the Uchiha stumbled to his feet and took a step forward, but he quickly checked himself after noticing the Hyuga's expression and the size of the intruder's bosom. Man, oh man. Despite her guttural accent, he was able to understand her when she said, "Look, kid, I don't care what y'all have to fucking say." The reference made Sasuke red in the face. Just tell me this one thing, and then I'll leave y'all two alone to do your love. Shit. Hey look, lady, I have a girl. She looked at him and said, shut up. He knew that it was best to keep quiet at that moment. Friend. Still unwilling to give up control, he mouthed glumly. Child, cooperate. With his booming voice and his ostentatious theatrics, Toshiro entered the mental dialogue. God, he already understood. His desperate obsession with snow no longer needed to be displayed. Yes, whatever. The purple woman was in his face, and the teenage boy couldn't help but whimper in agony as her torso was inches from his. Tell me. Did the Hyuga girl and you break into the Nara's compound the night after he passed away? Sasuke gave a tight-lipped nod and glanced at Hinata, who appeared uninterested in the revelation. There it was. No more beating around the bush. Okay then. She exited the room with a quick spin and a flourish, as if she was in a big rush. Standing there with his face flushed from the sudden excitement, Sasuke glanced at Hinata once more before realizing that he simply had to tell her. He murmured distractedly, wait a minute, Hinata-chan, I'll get you something to drink. She hardly heard him, as she had resumed her languid gaze on the bouquet. Surely the purple-haired bitch was still in the hospital, so he shut the door behind him and ran to the main entrance. Ah, here we have it. With her arms folded across her stomach, she stood in the hallway just in front of Hinata's room. She knew he had more to say, but he had made it pretty clear. The Uchiha approached her and met her inquisitive eyes with a defiant assurance. Not that anyone was in earshot, but one could never be too cautious, he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. I think I know who's behind this. God. Don't tell me y'all little shits went over there to fucking investigate, Enko said, slapping her forehead. Did you? The Uchiha whimpered in agony, but he deserved it. She grabbed Sasuke's ear and gave it a long, hard twist when he nodded, embarrassed. Are the two of you completely insane? Well, what if that guard had been slightly more intelligent than he was? Then, what would two fucking genin have done? In hindsight, going on their own investigation was a dope, retarded idea. Anyway, he said, interrupting the woman's lecture, I have a very strong suspicion that the one we're investigating is the perpetrator of these crimes. Sasuke took the criticism. The lead from some random, naive teenager was better than nothing, and Anko was genuinely intrigued. I think it's the Uzumaki. The Jonin looked at him questioningly. What? Naruto. Sasuke was a little annoyed that she couldn't understand the name, Uzumaki Naruto. After giving it some more thought, the purple-haired Kunoichi let out a loud guffaw that sent a flurry of nurses and doctors from the other wards sprawling on the floor to find out what was causing the disturbance. All right, child. I have one thing to tell you. Let the fucking pros do this, please, because you're a total Nimrod at it. She quickly left the scene by leaving through the open window without waiting to hear Sasuke's outraged responses. With a fierce snarl on his face and barely disguised contempt, Sasuke gazed at her rapidly fading back. Ignorant slut, we'll see who's the Nimrod. We'll see. The Death Forest. The entire arrangement appeared flimsy at best, with the number 44 embossed on the steel plate in a now faded red glaze and hanging on a small wire from the deteriorated steel fence. Beyond the intimidating sign, there was the dark green foliage of a place that had seen more than 1,000 violent murders and a great many more of the irksome and yet fascinating betrayals that Uzumaki Naruto so deeply loved. He lay on the bark of the tree he had slept on so many times as a child, looking contentedly at the full moon as it slowly moved across the sky once more. The Jonin, who was standing in front of him, fidgeting sourly, was anything but content. Uchiha Itachi had a billion questions, maybe billions of them, just waiting to be asked, but he kept his mouth shut in the hope that the blonde would explain himself, explain what he had done. For once, tell him what happened next rather than letting him be taken by surprise every single time. The silence only made Itachi more irritated, and he began to pace, circling the same spot he had just been standing on. Naruto noticed his sensei's dismay out of the corner of his eye, and he returned his attention to the frowning prodigy, deciding to dispel his doubts for the one time. Ask me more, Itachi. Sensei, and I'll have to end our relationship because it's become a bit boring lately. The man with the brown hair beside him leaned down and put his left hand on Naruto's head. The blonde inhaled deeply, removing the frown from his face, and turned to Itachi, his expression neutral. Why are you so irritated, Itachi? Sensei. The honorific sounded almost sarcastic as he spoke in a casual manner. His partner halted his circling motion and turned his head, gazing into the Jinchuriki's eyes. I don't comprehend a thing. Naruto raised an eyebrow quizzically, not used to insubordination, especially from someone he'd turned so long ago, but even when you care to explain the situation to me, you choose to twist the truth in those damn riddles you seem to enjoy so much, he raged. It is our duty to rescue them from the darkness of uncertainty, to ensure that they remain on the narrow path you designate for them. Even the most devoted of allies falter, child, Aizen said with a disappointed edge to his voice, as if drawn from experience. Naruto, tell me what you have planned. The blonde could tell that Itachi was serious about this by the grim resolve in his sensei's eyes. The steel forehead protector gleamed brightly in the moonlight, the black leaf symbol embossed into the metal reflecting the pale white glow perfectly. Naruto ran a hand through his now buzz-cut blonde hair, which he had trimmed just that evening as a sort of mourning for the tragedy that had befallen their team. Very well. He saw the glint of approval in the jet-black recesses of the Uchiha's eyes, and he knew that his second-in-command would remain committed for as long as he was needed. As the Uzumaki continued to explain the course events were going to take over the next few days, he watched with barely contained amusement as the Uchiha's eyes widened, first with shock, then with a restless energy as he understood Naruto's motives perfectly. The regal figure beside him even smiled slightly, suggesting that the situation had been handled well. Of course, what was going to happen was entirely different from the delusion Naruto had fed Itachi, but it didn't matter at all because, under the hypnotic influence of Kyoka Suigetsu, Itachi would see what he should be seeing. He ducked under the wire fence, pushing the broken part open with his hand, and then crouching through the orifice. Naruto got up, patting the back of his trousers like a child his age would, and walked out of the forest with the Uchiha prodigy in tow. What was about to happen was too immediate to change, because the hypnosis would have to be placed gradually, and in layers, for a strong mind like Itachi's. Naturally, they were headed to the enclosure to witness yet another Avenger's pointless quest for vengeance. Naruto's sense of humor returned with each step. Oh, what a beautiful night. And he simply ignores me. That self-centered jerk hasn't even seen me since he came back. Yamanaka Ino ignored the annoying whining. She was never particularly happy, but sitting at the cash register while listening to the pink bitch vent about her couple of issues was a new low for her. Had her glowing mother not threatened to keep her from leaving the store at knife point, the blonde would have simply fled the nightmare scene as quickly as possible. Even more ironic was the fact that her ex-boyfriend was the object of bitching, and the person bitching him was the one who had taken him away from her. Ino had the impression that there was a crowd watching this and laughing uncontrollably. When Haruno Sakura saw the Yamanaka at the register, quietly going about her business, she decided that her estranged childhood friend should be the one to be utterly bored by her problems, and that's exactly what happened. Haruno Sakura had come there to buy some ornaments for her mother. Fuck my life. When she saw another shady character walk by, she was about to lose it and yell at Pinky to get the hell out and leave her alone. This never-ending parade of randomness has to stop, she cried out to the sky. She left her place at the counter for the second time, risking her mother's immediate crucifixion, and ran after Shikamaru, who appeared to be trying to kill someone. She caught up to the Nara and tapped him on the shoulder, causing him to halt and turn silently, his movements slow, as though he didn't want to deviate from the goal in his mind. What took place at the cage's place? He gave her a ferocious look that would have intimidated a tiger, but she disregarded his intention to kill and continued questioning him. There's no need to mince words here, she thought. Dude. What's that expression? She said, you look wrathful, anticipating that he would scratch his head and grumble. Nothing. The Yamanaka abruptly moved in front of Shikamaru, interrupting him as he turned to go. You know you can always talk to me, right? You're worrying me, Shikamaru, she said, her voice rising a few notes in concern. If there's anything, let me know. Move. The word was barely a whisper, but Shikamaru's voice was so captivating that Ino felt compelled to comply, ignoring the wise counsel of her subconscious and pressing again. What on earth happened yesterday, Kami? Sama, I'm sure I can assist, you simply must. Almost as if out of thin air, a kunai materialized in his hand, and he flicked it in the air, catching it with skill without even looking. Just move. He strode past without a word, having already put the kunai back where it had come from, and Ino stepped aside without thinking, her instincts telling her to get out of his way as quickly as possible. The Nara's personality had changed in some way, and she stared at his back, too stunned to speak. His father's death had not been entirely in vain, but some of the changes were startlingly rapid and drastic, even for a trauma like this. She had never seen his eyes so focused, his gait so active, and his words so harsh. She decided to follow him, and when a firm hand on her shoulder stopped her from moving forward, she turned her head once more, amazed at how many times she'd done that in such a short period of time. She nodded and waited until Shikamaru was out of earshot before Kakashi lowered his finger and waited patiently for the inevitable questioning. Ino vaguely remembered the Jonin, who had visited the shop on the same day each year to buy flowers for some deceased friend. Rumors had it that he had killed her during the Third Shinobi War, but hearsay was a very unreliable judge of character, at least in Ino's opinion. What? He's going. I must pursue him, to make Soraya. What you need to do, Ino-chan, Kakashi said in a condescending tone that made Ino want to strike him, is to go back and listen to Sakura-chan as she finishes her story. Kakashi simply shook his head firmly. As you can see, I'm already on Shikamaru duty. Go ahead. The blonde was about to respond when he said, and no arguments. The Sandaime has given me this task. According to military protocol, the genin must listen to the jonin and keep quiet. The gray-haired jonin's use of jargon caught Ino off guard because, normally, he was very casual, even using some repulsive words he had learned from Icha to make his deal when he felt the chrysanthemums were too costly. This was a different side of him that she had never expected to see, but it didn't really matter because they hardly ever met in everyday life. However, Kakashi's reluctance to return to his reconnaissance indicated that today was anything but normal, and Ino, not even noticing the Yamanaka's absence, pouted and walked back to the shop where Pinky was still ranting. I tell you, I have a 70% confidence that Sasuke-kun and that Hyuga woman are involved. Take a peek at how much time they spent together. With only a nod to prevent herself from dozing off and Sakura from feeling as though she was speaking to a blonde wall, Ino phased out once more, her mind racing with all the possible ways that Shikamaru could have obtained a secret Jonin watchdog in headquarters. Kakashi-san, take care of him. She silently prayed for the Nara and for protection from Sakura's annoying voice. Take care of him so he can live another day. The Konoha headquarters Grand Hall had a very gloomy atmosphere. This was one of the few occasions when Sarutobi Hiruzen was aware of the meeting's agenda without being told. He sat with his head hung low, searching his considerable but waning intellect for a way out of the predicament Danzo had put him in. The council's sole lady, the venerable Utatane Kaharu, stood solemnly, as if she had prepared her remarks. The other three elders seated nodded, allowing her to speak. I now commence this emergency meeting of the Konoha Ikenban, she said, clearly enunciating each syllable. For the last few weeks, ever since the completion of the Genin selection exams, we've been watching the leadership of the Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, fall into utter disrepair. Hiruzen was aware that this last stretch was the last nail in the coffin. He was responsible for the village's abrupt collapse into chaos as well as his remarkably incompetent handling of the deaths of Nara Shikaku and Uchiha Shisui. Danzo hardly suppressed a smirk as he said, "We, the council, have no option but to hold the Hokage responsible for recent events." Even at this age, he can't help but gloat a little. Like flotsam in the middle of a sea storm, Hiruzen felt powerless, which was a completely foreign feeling to the 60-something Hokage, who was accustomed to and excelled at being in control. His excellent track record until now notwithstanding. This was the part that Hiruzen dreaded the most. He had made a valiant effort to prevent this situation by exploring all of his options until none remained. Having appointed Uchiha Itachi as the leader of the Genin team, he had believed that the C-rank mission that they would effortlessly complete would elevate his reputation for proposing such a perfect fit for the Genin teams and somewhat boost his credibility. Reducing the difficulty of the missions while asking for them was a common practice, especially among those who couldn't afford anything better, but this one, unlike any of the other fakes before it, had suddenly reared its ugly head at the exact wrong time. Instead of returning exhausted but victorious, their finest four-man cell had sacrificed a crazy amount because of a simple fraud that had been pulled all the time in the past. Additionally, Relations between the isolated clan of the Sharingan were worse than ever after Uchiha Shisui's mysterious death, Nara Shikaku's almost retaliatory tit-for-tat move, and Uchiha Inabe's unexpected murder just yesterday evening. Even among the civilian villagers, murmurs of a coup d'état were spreading, and Danzo had likely picked them up and used them against him. After the Genin incident, Hiruzen even attempted to persuade the young but bright Shikamaru, the son of the recently deceased Nara, if he was willing to succeed his father. However, as usual, his attempt to win back the favor of the elders had backfired, turning the teenager into a defiant, rebellious mess who needed a Jonin observer to ensure he didn't do anything crazy or self-destructive. Hiruzen has made a number of poor and foolish decisions during this crisis, which has increased the chaos and fear among the ordinary villagers. We were also not pleased with his attempt to enlist the Nara child in support of his cause. Given that Shikamaru was only 13 and already traumatized, there was no reason to make him make such a decision right away. The elderly woman was unrepentant. It would have been impossible for anyone observing to realize how intimate Kaharu and Hiruzen were on a personal level, where accountability did not play a role as it did in this instance. I vote that Sarutobi Hiruzen be stripped of his title as the Hokage. Danzu's smirk turned into a full smile, and Mitokado Homura, the other elder present, nodded grudgingly as the crushing finality of her words struck Hiruzen like a hammer, driving out his will to live in one fell swoop. Is there anyone against this motion? Kaharu gave off the impression that she was eager to finish this, as if the idea itself made her mouth turn. Oh, the bright side, Hiruzen thought sardonically. Turning to the Sandaime for maximum impact, she continued, of course, we do have to hear out the Hokage's defense against this impeachment. Prior to our final vote, it is only right that he be given an opportunity to clarify his position. Her words made it clear that she did not want this to go to the final vote, but sadly, Hiruzen had nothing to save himself, so she was throwing him a lifeline. Sarutobi Hiruzen, what are your thoughts? She pressed, hoping to get a response from him. There was nothing there, he knew. Danzo had timed it too well, and there were no more rabbits to drag out. He lifted his face and looked into everyone's eyes with a defiant determination, driven by the realization that there was nothing left to lose. I have nothing to add in my defense, he said. I shall take full responsibility for the incidents of the previous 3 weeks, and will accept whatever outcome the vote brings. He noticed a slight drop in Kaharu's expression as she awkwardly lifted her hand. I am forced to remove Sarutobi Hiruzen from his position as Sandaime Hokage following that defense. Everything is in favor. Both Danzo and the old geezer raised their arms, the latter with a brazen eagerness that made Hiruzen sick with revulsion. So that's how it ends, huh? Hiruzen felt nothing and no regret, no anger, no sadness. As they say, death is lighter than a feather, duty heavier than a mountain. I'm definitely not dead yet, and now that the burden has been lifted from my old, unworthy shoulders, I'll do everything in my power to keep my village safe. He gave Danzo a sour look that made it obvious he was disappointed in his longtime friend. Danzo, watch out one wrong move and I'll get you. From the outside, the house appeared empty. The Uchiha household that occupied it had already gone to sleep, even though it was only about 10 in the evening, and the moon wasn't out today because of the dense cloud cover that threatened to descend with wrath. The timing of the murder was ideal, it was going to rain that night. Even though the security was greatly increased, Nara Shikamaru had already broken into the enclosure for the second time that week, and each time he attempted to do so, it seemed to get easier, almost as if they had purposefully left the wide gaps in their security there. To the Nara's dismay, the more this situation worsened, the more narrow-sighted the Uchiha became. He entered the house without hesitation, and no one would suspect that he was there, not with everyone's attention on those Uchiha who were connected to the crime scene. Panic causes tunnel vision. Beware of that. That was basic genin no. How, discarded by even the most prudent of shinobi in such times. Shikamaru eased open the side window, and the glass pane and the frame were well maintained, despite showing signs of age, and they slid upwards without so much as a squeak. Fools, despite your blatant denials, it is clear that you are treacherous. Stealth was crucial, and he could not afford to take any chances, considering the near-legend status of his next victim. Uchiha Itachi was nowhere near the Nara enclosure on that fateful night, but he had gotten information from the unfortunate dolt who had allowed the next pair of intruders to escape, and he had discovered that the two dojutsu had been seen together. It was more than a coincidence that the Jonin was the leader of a team that perfectly fit that description. He had arrived at the bedroom, where the solid wood door was locked from the inside. He slipped two shadows from under the jamb, twisted the latch open, patting the click with some suppressing chakra. Shikamaru was fairly certain that neither Sasuke nor Hinata had entered a clearly dangerous area like that without some sort of coercion. Itachi had to be behind this in some way. The Nara was unsure of the role the ex-Anbu assassin had played in his father's murder, but he was going to be the next victim in a long line until he discovered who had actually committed the crime. Shikamaru suppressed a sigh of relief as his victim was sound asleep and Uchiha Itachi's chest rose and fell gently beneath the pale blue cotton sheets. Whatever the reason, facing the village's most feared dojutsu user was nerve-wracking, and he carefully threaded the chakra flows through the bedspread's fibers without making a sound. There was no need to show forced entry as extraneous evidence, and Itachi's own powerful chakra seeping into the sheets for such a long time would cover up any traces of his own. The net was prepared. He only needed to begin pressing down, and the filaments of chakra would wink out yet another meaningless life from this world. But something was stopping him this time. The previous two were easy. His anger had been a torrent that had swept away any doubts about the killings he was carrying out, but now, with the Uchiha Jonin snoring softly on the bed, it felt a little too simple. Something was going to go wrong. What was he missing? Just what? A gleam of silver. Every Uchiha house in the enclosure was on high alert from the inside, so it was foolish to think that Itachi and his family would be any different. Two pairs of extremely powerful arms grabbed him from either side, threatening to split his spine in two. He was too busy racking his brain to notice how he'd missed this possibility to display any visible signs of panic. Shikamaru used all of his considerable intelligence to figure out a way out as he saw the cage Bunshin melt beneath the sheets. He needed to be alive to witness the purging of the traitors, and his capture appeared to have weakened that very condition, as his two captors had severed his chakra sources, and he was unable to even find his weapons, his arms extended like a hideous scarecrow. Shikamaru's worry turned to fear when he realized that there were 5 more shadow clones waiting, 3 guarding the bedroom door and 2 hanging from the ceiling, and he flinched as the rough baling wire they were using to truss him up like a chicken sank into his wrists. 2 figures emerged from the very shadows he was working with, their silhouettes clear in the moonlight. And so the wretch makes his appearance. Uchiha Itachi's deadpan voice was very distinctive, and the shorter figure said nothing, confirming Shikamaru's fears. Did you think you'd go on a rampage without any consequences? To let you cut through my clan with no consequences? Itachi went on. Hey, so you were prepared, Shikamaru said, remaining unflappable despite his circumstances. The fact that his powerful opponent had let him survive this long could only mean that he would be spared his life, at the very least. I knew the best of the inglorious bastards would prove to be a challenge. The haughty acceptance of the winner, well, inglorious we are, I must admit, makes me want to stab myself just to avoid hearing this. Shikamaru felt his blood spill onto the carpeted floor from the deep gashes in his wrists from his struggle against his bonds. You must already have realized that I have given you permission to live because I still value you, but you must respond to this question before I go around doing you any favors. What presumptions did you make that resulted in your recent string of homicides? With a smile, Shikamaru said, Why do you think I'll speak? All I know is that in retaliation for what happened to my father, your kind must be wiped out. Yours, as well as those cowards with lavender eyes who conceal their strength and influence. His smile turned into a savage snarl as he spoke. He was unable to control it. This farce was making his blood boil. The Byakugan. Shikamaru's mind raced, trying desperately to figure out why his captor was unaware of that basic fact. That 2 sets of dojutsu were clearly seen at the crime scene, and that those 2 were working together in a way that had never been seen before, meaning that only one pair in the entire village of Konoha could have pulled this off. If Itachi didn't know, then he was either genuinely clueless or… Fuck. You're acting on information that was, at best, erratic and that was obtained from a witness under extreme psychological pressure. Why did this happen? I regret to inform you that you are unnecessarily venting your grief on the Uchiha. The Nara's mind reeled at the crushing finality of Itachi's words. However, if it wasn't one of those 2, who else had the strength to defeat my… The other figure entered the moonlight, and his hair, which contrasted sharply with the jet black tresses of the Uchiha Jonin, was a distinctive color in the darkness. You? His heart pounded fiercely against his ribs, and he was so close to the answer that he was unable to control his confusion. Indeed. Shikamaru strained hard against his bonds, the twine cutting deeper into his wrists, the sudden stabs of pain only making him more angry. Uchiha Itachi's voice was devoid of pretense and remorse. The prodigy went on, Everything has a purpose, and so do you, Shikamaru-kun. I'm afraid that even your completely misguided outburst of hatred toward a clan that didn't deserve it has unpredictably accelerated my plan. What's the plan? What are you talking about, for heaven's sake? He took a hard punch to the gut from the clone on his left. Shikamaru felt his consciousness slipping, his vision blurring, and he fell limply, supported only by the 2 Bunshin, coughing blood onto the carpet. I will always remember this, you cunning rodent. The darkness came rushing in. I despise you. For heaven's sake. Hitaki Kakashi threw himself off the windowsill and ran as fast as he could, his senses burning from the combined pressure of Itachi's and Naruto's chakras behind him. He wondered how those monsters could have such power without giving in to it. A nameless fear stirred his heart as he ran, a dread he could attribute to no reason whatsoever. This investigation had been far more fruitful than he had ever imagined. Getting to the core of the issue in such a short amount of time and defeating that sulky hussy for the first time in his life had its own satisfaction, of course, but who would have thought the problem ran so deep? Neither of the two freaks had given Shikamaru a direct response. He twisted his body mid-jump to allow a kunai to pass him unharmed. Shit. They're after me. He vaulted the enclosure's high wall with only centimeters left as a flurry of blades lodged themselves in the wooden scaffolding directly beneath his palms. He hit the ground running, no longer keeping quiet, his combat boots making strange flaps on the sand as he pushed his body to the limit, maximizing the distance between him and the enclosure with stunning speed. He knew the Sandame would find this information invaluable, but if he were caught and killed before it was delivered, his follower would not give up. The Anbu Jonin's attempts to shake off pursuit were repeatedly thwarted, and for once he wished he had been on field duty more recently. Espionage had ruined his physical abilities. It wasn't one of the beasts unless they'd wisely repressed their output, but facing one in a neutral environment like the village proper had much better odds than inside the Uchiha compound. He closed his eyes and jumped from one parapet to another, one follower at a time. The scar on his left eye throbbed a little. Kakashi made an instinctive decision and whipped around, removing his sword from its sheath. Whoever you are, this may be really stupid, but I believe it ends here. Any head-on attack would be easier to face now. The chakra source drew closer, and Kakashi could feel the signature resonance from the Sharingan his pursuer was obviously deploying. He slid his forehead protector up, opened his left eyelid, and skidded to a halt on the slanted rooftop, securing his purchase on the baked clay tiles, hunching his shoulders, and dropping onto the balls of his feet. Obito steeled his resolve as his gift was activated, bringing with it the familiar stab of pain and the nearly crippling drain on his meager chakra reserves. The distinctive blend of fire chakra in his opponent's silhouette was clearly Itachi's, and Kakashi's stomach churned in terror. Go ahead, Kohai.kun. Whoa, Kakashi.san. Are we fighting a junior? The gray-haired Jonin sighed, despite the seriousness of the situation. Urahara Kazuki had the regrettable ability to butt in at the worst possible times. Until this fight is over, preferably forever, I would appreciate it if you would just keep quiet unless you have something specific to say. You are cruel. The green-striped bastard had a sly smile on his half-bearded face, and for some reason, the link between them enabled Kakashi to see the bastard's facial expressions with his mind's eye. I think you were wrong, but we'll have to wait and see, Kakashi.san. What? Kakashi's eyes widened as he realized his mistake, and he parried the deadly offensive his opponent had launched into, shouting to be heard above the din of their clashing metal. His follower dropped down onto him, swinging a katana in a deadly top-down strike that would have sliced him in half if it weren't for his own sword blocking the strike. For crying out loud, wait, Sasuke, hold on. His assailant heard him and appeared to come to. The prodigy's younger brother, who was still in combat stance but had dropped his sword hand, looked at him with a look that was equal parts confusion and annoyance. Despite the emotions and the unanswered questions that were clearly running through his mind, he managed to maintain a level voice. Kakashi.san. What were you doing there? Oh, you little shit, that's my line. Only a sliver of light came in through the gossamer curtains, and the moon had long since passed its zenith, and the air was heavy with the stench of disinfectant. Hinata's eyes were open, but she remained silent and far away, still staring out the window. The flowers the Uzumaki had brought the day before were starting to wilt in the white ceramic vase next to her pillows. Kakashi leaned silently in a corner, his forehead protector back over his scarred left eye. And Sasuke sat on a wooden stool beside the Hyuga heiress, playing with a corner of the bedspread. So, we probably have very little time, Kakashi said, his baritone dulled by his mask. Tell me what you saw. The Jonin had asked the first question, but the Uchiha had a million of his own. The night the Nara's dad was killed, Hinata and I had gone to the scene of the crime. What did you do? Kakashi interrupted, but as Sasuke gave him a menacing glance, he fell silent once more. His hand gripped the bedsheet tightly, turning as white as the rough cotton fabric. I had my suspicions that it was him. We snuck in but couldn't find any hard proof of his involvement at all. I had to use genjutsu on a guard who watched us go to make him forget what had happened. I knew it was a stopgap measure. They would eventually search through his memories and locate us, or at the very least, the glimpse of our eyes he had managed to capture before I could hypnotize him. Kakashi scowled. So at least we now understand why Shikamaru targeted your brother and connected the murder to the Uchiha. There is only one pair that could ever be discovered together. The Byakugan and the Sharingan. Both Hinata. Shan and you. He came to the conclusion that your home held the solution, but why would he attempt to murder Itachi? And that smug, arrogant asshole he's adopted as his disciple serves him well as an assassin when it's convenient. Sasuke could hardly contain his anger as he said, I'm sure my wretched Ni-san is at the heart of this. Everything now makes sense. Shisui. Ni's unexpected murder, my brother and Shisui.Ni taking him under their wing, his strange return. Kakashi's gaze expanded. Hold on. Was Shisui involved with Naruto as well? Of course he fucking was, Sasuke grumbled. And now Ida. Ni's gone and killed him, and my brother continues to further his nihilistic goals. Kakashi shook his head slowly, as if in shock, saying, oh, no, this cannot be. No, not like this. Kakashi, spill it. With his own anxieties reaching almost a frantic level, Sasuke yelled, what the fuck do you know? With thoughtful eyes, the Jonin said, Sandame. Sama's resignation. The man who's next in line for Hokage. Fuck, oh. The next man in line. The Hokage stepped down. Sasuke didn't understand what Kakashi was saying. Come along with me. Right now, after a moment of hesitation, Sasuke followed the gray-haired man as he slid the window open and leapt out. Sasuke caught up to the older man, struggling to speak over the roaring wind, and they appeared to be making their way back to the enclosure. Hey, Kakashi. What the fuck is going on? He said, dropped the honorific. We were gravely wrong to leave the Uchiha compound, Kakashi said without pausing his stride. If I'm right, and I fear that I am, he said, terribly incorrect. What does that mean to you? Itachi claimed that Shikamaru's arbitrary murder of Uchiha clan members was the only thing that accelerated his plan. Thousands of lives would be lost in a full-fledged civil war that would break out if word spread that these killings were being carried out as retaliation, especially considering the tensions with your leaders and the village as a whole. Sarutobi. Sama was the only one with sufficient influence to prevent that from occurring. Now that he's out of the way, Danzo can do whatever he wants. Additionally, given that man's inclination toward the Uchiha, Sasuke struggled to keep up his pace as his blood ran cold. What might happen if? It's not possible, Ida.Ni wouldn't do that. When he heard a crackling in the distance, he looked into the darkness to see what it was, and his heart jumped into his mouth as his eyes adapted to the darkness. The enclosure of Uchiha was ablaze. UUUUUUUCK. Since only 2 members of the clan possessed the capacity and sheer amount of chakra necessary to sustain such a massive flame for an extended period of time, the responsible Kaden, Ryusenka, must have been the size of an entire complex of buildings. However, only one of those 2 was still alive at the time, so. Ida. Ni? Sasuke pushed his body to the limit, and his frantic, almost panicked, steps on the rooftops were enmeshed in confusion, his desperate wish to understand what was happening but his hesitancy to actually see it. Kakashi kept pace at his side, fear visible in his eyes as well. Amidst the loud whoosh of air being sucked in by the fire greedily feasting on the wooden structures, he cleared the wall with a single, huge leap, cushioning his landing with chakra to keep his feet from being charred by the boiling flames. His entire clan was dying in unison, and there was nothing he could do about it. Kakashi landed beside him, picking his limp body off the ground as his foot slipped on a slippery patch of charcoal dust, causing him to fall from the rooftops onto the ground, grazing his chin. Hey, come on, let's go. We must locate them. With a nod, Sasuke's legs no longer supported him, and his soul was being consumed by staring at the embers slowly roasting his relatives. The Jonin's military instinct took over, and he slapped his new subordinate across the face. Genin. To remind him of his responsibility, it was crucial to address him by rank. Get up and move it. I'm Da. Sasuke snapped back to reality and nodded, realizing that this was no time for suffering. He jogged forward, followed closely by Kakashi, and they looked around the houses for anyone they could save, but the job had been done too thoroughly. Everyone had been asleep, and the guards on duty were slumped on patrol, their bodies covered in kunai. There, the figure of his brother, silhouetted by the flames in the moonlight, was holding something as someone, actually a high in the air as Kakashi screamed and pointed. Ida. Ni. Leaping up towards the roof his damned brother was standing on. Sasuke screamed until his lungs burned from breathing in all the smoke around him. He then zigzagged through the vermilion flames, scrambling through the crumbled wreckage of his neighbor's house, hoping that the one he hadn't yet killed might be saved. No, Sasuke's brain froze at that moment. Up until now, he had been able to deny everything, to somehow convince himself that this was all a scam, to believe in his brother's innocence, at least when it came to killing his own people, but no more. Itachi drove his wakizashi right through his victim's chest, driving it up to the hilt. A killing blow, regardless of how quickly they got the poor soul to the hospital. Itachi's looming figure continued to hold up the victim's corpse by his hair, staring straight into his eyes as Sasuke landed awkwardly on the parapet, barely straightening his ankle before he stumbled off the roof, ignoring the stabs of pain his ankle made every time he put weight on it, limping over to where his brother was, his movements now mechanical, motivated more by unconscious effort than any will whatsoever. At least he could say a final prayer for the miserable soul if he could see the face of this one person. That would be some comfort, but Sasuke was past irony now. He had witnessed everything. His simple mind could not ask any more questions. Sasuke thought he was far beyond any further disbelief, but a single look at the corpse in Itachi's hands shattered every half-baked theory of reality he had in his mind. His brother turned to face him, the raging tempest of flames mirrored in his glazed eyes, like those of a cadaver. The blonde hair, that orange jacket. It's obvious. Uzumaki Naruto hung loosely with his head upturned and his mouth crimson.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.